Chapter 631. The little boy heard a man and a woman whispering under the tree. After they left, he raised his head and whispered to Xiangtian, "Qianbei Xiangtian, what's going on? Is there any other inside story about the election of the chief supervisor of Zhenyan Tantrism?" Xiangtian's eyes lit up and she said, "Maybe it's true. It's not surprising that he has his own way to get inside information." The little boy asked in confusion, "But why is he fighting with the Chinese?" Xiangtian rolled her eyes at him and said, "You ask me, but who should I ask? Come on, keep an eye on these two guys and follow them quietly." After the two of them discussed for a while, they waited until the Dharma debate was over before slipping down from the tree and quietly following behind the TV station's group. After the Buddhist debate, which attracted the attention of the whole country, the staff of the major TV stations were also busy packing up the machinery, and then got into the car to leave. However, Xiangtian and the little boy found that many TV stations had left some of their staff behind. These staff members looked like they were on a tour, but in fact, there were pinhole cameras hidden in their handbags and chests. Obviously, they had obtained some inside information. Seeing this scene, Xiangtian and the little boy became more and more excited. The two of them also hid the machine, quickly found a miniature camera from their car and carried it with them. They pretended to be tourists and followed behind these TV station reporters, looking around. They passed through the Golden Hall of Mount Koya, passed through the Imperial Shadow Hall, and then entered the hinterland of Mount Koya, Okanoin. After entering the Okanoin, when they crossed a small bridge, they came to the Memorial Lantern Hall, only to see a group of people shouting at the gate of a courtyard in the distance. Xiangtian and the little boy walked over quickly. When they got closer, they saw that the leaders were two reporters from the TV station. It was the man and the woman who had been whispering under the tree and had a super friendship relationship. There were about a dozen men and women next to them, all of whom were reporters from other TV stations. The leading reporter pointed angrily at the courtyard and said angrily, "We are reporters. We have the right to freedom of the press. Why don't you let us in for an interview?" Ever since the Meiji Restoration, Japan announced that it would leave Asia and enter Europe. It learned from the Westerners in every aspect and had always flaunted itself as a free capitalist country. The press was free and everything was free. But in fact, Japan was the only country in the world where the underworld was legal. The country was controlled from top to bottom by large conglomerates, political families, and underworld forces. Black money politics were everywhere, and the so-called freedom of the press was just a whitewash. After the earthquake in Japan, there was a nuclear leak. The United States sent a special envoy to the Prime Minister's residence to criticize Japan. This was tantamount to sending an emperor into the core of Japanese politics. It was a great shame for a sovereign country, but the Japanese mainstream media was resigned to it. No one reported a word about it. It could be seen that the so-called freedom of the press in Japan was just a joke to the privileged class. Because of this, the expression and tone of the monk guarding the courtyard seemed a little arrogant. He pointed to a sign at the door that read, "No entry," and said, "Don't you see this sign?" The female reporter clearly didn't expect to be stopped outside. She thought about how the section chief would vent his anger on her after she failed to complete the task. She shuddered and couldn't help but say angrily, "What's wrong with this sign? We also have a sign." As she spoke, she raised her press card. The reporters from other TV stations also followed suit. For a moment, there were many arms at the entrance of the courtyard, and everyone was holding up the press card in their hands. The monk at the door was a little impatient. He said angrily, "This is a royal forbidden area specially enclosed by His Majesty the Emperor of Japan. No one is allowed to enter." Although the power of the Emperor of Japan was not as high on the altar as before World War II, and a word from him could make countless Japanese people die for him, because the Emperor had not been pulled down from the altar after World War II, so he still had a very high prestige. As soon as the monk said this, the originally excited reporters all quieted down. They looked at each other and didn't dare to speak again. Only the leading female reporter was unwilling to give up and said, "I have even interviewed His Majesty the Emperor of Japan, and I have also entered His Majesty's bedroom. Why can't I go in here?" The monk was already very annoyed. He simply closed his eyes, put his palms together, and blocked the door like a door god. No matter what anyone said, he would not open his eyes or get out of the way. The female reporter wanted to say something, but she was stopped by her male companion, who shook his head and said, "Rumiko, don't be impulsive. Let's think of another way." When the reporters from the other TV stations saw that they were terrified, they all hung their heads dejectedly and stopped shouting. However, they all gathered at the entrance and refused to leave. Some of the smarter reporters decided to take pictures of the outside to see who would enter the enclosed courtyard from here. The young man from Wakayama TV station looked at his senior helplessly and said, "Qianbei Xiangtian, what should we do now?" Xiangtian had been dreaming of digging out a big piece of news and getting a raise and promotion when she goes back, but the cruel fact shattered her dream in an instant. She glared at the young man angrily and said, "How do I know? Don't you see that there's nothing we can do?" The young man muttered with some grievance, "Didn't you just say that it's nothing great?" After he finished speaking, his eyes suddenly lit up and he said, "By the way, Qianbei Xiangtian, why don't we secretly climb the wall and get in?" The young man pointed at the white wall of the courtyard, which was not high, and said with some excitement. However, Xiangtian stared at him as if he were an idiot and said, "Are you crazy? It's a big crime to offend His Majesty the Mikado." The young man looked disappointed. Just as he was about to speak, he saw a monk wearing a bamboo hat, holding a monk's staff in one hand and an alms bowl in the other. Xiangtian became excited. She quickly patted the young man on the shoulder and said, Look, this is the monk of the Pure Land School. It seems that the rumor is true. The monks of the Pure Land School are all here." The boy hurriedly adjusted the angle of the miniature camera hidden on the pin on his chest and aimed it at the monks. He saw that the bamboo hats on the monks' heads were pressed down so low that he could not see their faces clearly. However, he keenly noticed that the monk walking at the back had a slender physique, a small pointed chin, and skin as smooth as silk. He did not seem to be a man. The young man couldn't help asking, "Qianbei Xiangtian, that seems to be a woman?" Xiangtian said with a knowledgeable expression, "What's so strange about that? Some monks of the Pure Land School have families." But she soon said indignantly, "Damn it, they can all bring their families in. Why can't we?" While she was complaining, the people next to her exclaimed, "Ah, the abbot of the Fahua sect is also here. Yes, I heard that he is an eminent monk. Today, I see that he is really solemn." The monks of the Fahua sect were much more generous than those of the Pure Land School. Their abbot was walking in the front, wearing a red cassock with golden threads. He was chanting Buddhist scriptures with one hand. When he arrived at the door, he bowed to the monks at the door and then slowly walked in through the way. "The Fahua sect is also here. Are there any other sects?" Xiangtian couldn't help getting excited. As soon as she finished speaking, she saw two people slowly coming from afar. These two people walked side by side. The one in the lead wore a tall black hat and a white, long-sleeved robe. To the right of these two stood a man of about 40 years of age. He was dignified and handsome, and he exuded an imposing aura. His hands were clasped in front of him, and he slowly walked forward step by step. Beside him stood a young boy of about 15 or 16 years of age. He was also wearing a tall hat and a long robe. Because he was quite short, even though he imitated his father and had his hands clasped in front of him, his wide sleeves kept falling to the ground, dragging as he walked forward. Xiangtian and the young man widened their eyes in an instant. The young man said in surprise, "Am I seeing things? Is it a yin-yang master? Is this a TV series?" Xiangtian said excitedly with a fanatical expression on her face, "Oh my God, it's Abe, the patriarch of the Abe family. He's too handsome. It's better to meet him in person than to hear about him. The young patriarch is also very handsome. He's my type." Although the Abe family changed its surname to Tsuyuman in the Muromachi era of Japan and has been used to this day, the Japanese people and the cultivation world still habitually called the Tsuyuman family the Abe family, in order to express their respect for the Abe family, which has made great contributions to the Japanese cultivation world and even the whole country of Japan. After the patriarch and the young patriarch of the Abe family entered the courtyard, they soon disappeared from everyone's sight. Some reporters of Japanese TV stations were like star chasers, and they were reluctant to let go of the young masters of the Abe family. The young man of Wakayama TV station couldn't help sighing. It turns out that the Abe family still exists now. I thought it was made up in a TV series. Xiangtian sneered and said, "You are a guy who has gone mad from studying in college. Listen to me. After the Abe family changed its name to Tsuyoman, it was protected by the Tokugawa shogunate in the Edo period. It established the Tsuyoman Shinto, and has always held the real power of the Yin-yang group. After the Meiji Restoration, the new government deprived the Tsuyoman family of the monopoly of making calendars and abolished the Yin-yang sect. Fortunately, at that time, there were many branches of the Yin-yang sect led by the Tsuyoman family. They secretly formed the Tsuyoman Shinto Association. According to the draft Constitution of Freedom of Religious Belief drafted by General MacArthur, the Tsuyoman Shinto was able to become an official religious legal person and continue to inherit the legacy of the Abe family in the name of family learning. The young man was stunned. He was about to speak, but he saw a few men dressed in Yin-yang master costumes walking slowly. He couldn't help but be surprised and said, "Are they also from the Abe family?" Xiangtian took a look and shook her head. "No, they are the Yin-yang masters of the Kemo family, the mortal enemies of the Abe family." The young man looked at these Yin-yang masters walking slowly on the road with awe. He sighed and said, "It's really an eye-opener. I didn't expect that the contents in the TV and movies were all true." Xiangtian looked at him helplessly and said, "Shut your mouth. You really make me lose face. Open your eyes and watch carefully. This is a grand event in the Japanese cultivation world. It can be compared to the existence of the heroes in the Three Kingdoms period." It seemed that in order to prove Xiangtian's words, it didn't take long for the cultivators of the Japanese Shintoism, the Black Dwellers, the Shinto cultivation sect, the Chuyin Grand sect, the Fusang sect, the Shunli sect, the Golden Light sect, the Desheng sect, and other sects, as well as the witches and nuns of the major shrines, to come one after another. The reporters surrounding the courtyard gate were all stunned and sighed. When the last cultivator went in, Xiangtian couldn't help but stand on tiptoe and look inside. She sighed softly and said, "I really wish I could go inside and have a look." The young man couldn't help but sigh and say, "Yes, I really want to know what the Chinese man who is fighting with the Shingen Tantrism looks like. He is fighting with people alone in front of the entire Japanese cultivation world. Isn't he afraid?" As soon as he finished speaking, he saw a young boy walking slowly to him. The boy was dressed in a tang suit and had a headset in his ear. He asked with a smile, "Excuse me, why is he afraid?" Chapter 632. The little boy from Wakayama TV station heard this voice, but he couldn't understand what it was saying. He turned his head and saw a dignified boy standing in front of him. This boy looked a few years younger than him, but there was a kind of understanding and insight in his deep black pupils that even the old people did not have, as if there was a very mature and vicissitude soul in this young body. This boy was not only handsome, but also had an outstanding bearing. Compared with the cultivators of various sects in the Japanese cultivation world who had entered before, he was not inferior at all. He was even more romantic and unrestrained than them. At first glance, the little boy felt a little inferior. He turned to Xiangtian and said, "Qianbei Xiangtian, what is he talking about? It seems to be Chinese." Xiangtian happened to have studied Chinese in college. She looked at the handsome boy in front of her curiously. At this glance, she suddenly felt a masculine aura blowing over her face. Her heart was pounding, and her tongue was dry. She stammered, "He's so handsome, even more handsome than the young patriarch of the Abe family." The little boy smiled bitterly and said, "Qianbei Xiangtian, wake up. Don't be infatuated with him." Only then did Xiangtian wake up as if from a dream. She came to her senses and couldn't suppress her excitement. She stepped forward and said in Chinese that was not very standard, "Hello, are you from China?" The young boy smiled and nodded. "That's right. Help me ask him why this Chinese man who came to participate in the competition must be afraid." Xiangtian was a little confused. She looked at the boy in front of her seriously and muttered curiously, "I heard that the person who came to participate in the competition was a Chinese man. Could it be him?" "Impossible, absolutely impossible. He's too young, really too young." Although Xiangtian was puzzled, she didn't say it out loud. She turned to the little boy beside her and said, "Hey, he asked you why this Chinese man who came to participate in the competition must be afraid?" For a moment, the little boy was shocked by the temperament of the handsome boy in front of him. He was so ashamed that he couldn't say anything. On the other hand, some male reporters who were attracted by the conversation also looked at the shining boy in front of them with jealousy in their hearts. They sneered and said, "Do you still need to ask? When he came alone, he was scared to death by so many of us." Since ancient times, the same sex repels each other, while the opposite sex attracts each other. This young man was not only handsome, but he also exuded a mature aura that did not match his age. How could the eyes of the women present not light up when these two temperaments were mixed together? After listening to his words, the young boy smiled after a while and said, "I heard that you people in country are like the romance of the Three Kingdoms very much. Do you know about the one-on-one swordplay?" After he finished speaking, half of the Japanese reporters on the scene did not understand Chinese, so they asked the people next to them who understood Chinese. When they understood, they all laughed and said, "This idiot who overestimates himself, he actually compared that guy to Guan Yinchang. Hey, little guy, are you that Chinese guy who's fighting? If he isn't, then hurry up and scram back to your hometown. If he is, then study for a few more years before coming out. How can you compare yourself to Guan Yinzhang?" The young boy was not angry. He waited calmly for everyone to finish speaking, and then he glanced at them disdainfully. At this glance, everyone present couldn't help but have an idea. It was as if there was a young lion standing in front of them. He was looking down at the barking jackals around him. His eyes were full of disdain and pity, as if a high-level creature was looking down at a low-level creature. This was the gaze of a real strong person. Xiangtian quickly made a judgment in her heart. She curiously asked the young boy in half-baked Chinese, "Excuse me, who are you?" The young boy smiled slightly and said, "I'm the Chinese you're talking about." Sure enough. The eyes of everyone present suddenly showed a look of sure enough. Xiangtian's eyes flashed with excitement and she asked, "What's your name?" The boy smiled and said word by word, "My name is Li Yundong." The male reporters on the scene all shut up and looked at Li Yundong with hostility in their eyes. They secretly whispered to each other, and their expressions were full of schadenfreude, as if they couldn't wait for Li Yundong to suffer a crushing defeat in the next second. Some of them whispered, "Hey, this person is really too arrogant and self-righteous. Who does he think he is? How dare he compare himself to Guan Yinzhang? I really hope to give him a show of strength later." "You? Nonsense. I'm not a cultivator." Of course, it's the cultivators of the Japanese cultivation world who will give him a show of strength and kill his prestige. When Li Yundong came to Japan this time, Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin, who had been considerate, had specially prepared a portable Sino-Japanese translator for him. Li Yundong could understand what these Japanese were saying wherever he went. Li Yundong heard these people's words clearly, but his face didn't change, and the corners of his eyes narrowed slightly. Hearing Li Yundong's name, the monk, who had been closing his eyes at the gate of the courtyard, suddenly opened them. He walked up to Li Yundong and looked at him carefully. With hidden hostility in his eyes, he said in Chinese, "Are you Li Yundong?" Li Yundong nodded slightly. "That's right." The monk also nodded slightly and said with a complicated expression, "You're really here. How dare you? Please come in. Masako Tachibana has been waiting for you for a long time." However, Li Yundong put his hands behind his back and said lightly, "You can let me in, but you have to let Saionji Tsunekatsu come out to apologize to me first, and then let Masako Tachibana come out to welcome me in person. Otherwise. Go and tell Masako Tachibana. She will know what the consequences will be if she doesn't do as I say. The monk's face was full of anger. He shouted, "How dare you! Saionji Tsunekatsu is the young monk. How can you order him around?" Li Yundong smiled slightly. "You don't want to go?" The monk said angrily, B****, such a rude request, of course I can't. Before he could finish his words, he saw Li Yundong slap his forehead. The speed of this slap was not fast. It could be said that in the eyes of everyone, it was like slow motion. However, the monk seemed to have been hit by the body-fixing spell and couldn't move at all. He could only watch the palm get closer and closer and hit his head overwhelmingly. Everyone saw that Li Yundong's palm didn't seem to have much strength and speed, but they had a feeling in their hearts that if this palm went down, even a hard rock would be broken into pieces. This monk was dead. In an instant, the monk's face changed from yellow to white, from white to red, and then to blue. Seeing that the palm was about to hit his forehead, he couldn't help but let out a scream of fear. Li Yundong's palm suddenly hovered in front of his forehead, and he asked with a smile, "Are you going or not?" The monk was trembling all over, and his back was sweating like rain. He swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Just as he was about to speak, he saw that everyone around him was staring at him. He couldn't help but bite the bullet and say in Japanese, "No." As soon as he finished speaking, the reporters around him burst into cheers. "Good job. This is a real cultivator. Don't be afraid of this person. This is Japan." Li Yundong couldn't help but smile. He curled the 5 fingers of his palm in front of the monk's forehead, and then gently flicked his middle finger on the monk's forehead. In the eyes of others, this flick was like a child flicking the forehead. However, the monk was flicked by Li Yundong's finger, as if he had been hit by a high-speed train. His body suddenly flew out and disappeared in the blink of an eye. The voices of the people who were still cheering suddenly got stuck in their throats. Everyone looked at Li Yundong as if they had seen a monster, Godzilla. Their expressions were filled with fear and shock, and they didn't dare to say anything more. Li Yundong looked around and said, "Are there no other reception monks in Jinyan Tantrism?" At this time, everyone was frightened by Li Yundong. In addition, they were all ordinary people. Who dared to speak? For a moment, their eyes were dodging, and they didn't even dare to look at Li Yundong. Xiangtian, who was standing to one side, boldly said, "It seems that he is alone. Do you need someone to tell him?" "I can help." Li Yundong glanced at her and nodded slightly. "Okay, go and tell Masako Tachibana what I just said." Xiangtian was immediately ecstatic. She jumped up excitedly and shouted, "Yi!" This was a place that even the ace reporters couldn't enter, but she had actually entered. If she could get first-hand information, wouldn't she be able to get a promotion and raise her salary when she went back? Li Yundong watched Xiangtian rush inside in a hurry. He couldn't help laughing and shaking his head. He stood with his hands behind his back, like a pine tree standing in front of everyone. He looked arrogant and closed his eyes to rest. The surrounding Japanese male reporters were so angry that their teeth itched, while some female reporters secretly took photos and videos of Li Yundong. They sighed in their hearts, "No matter what, he is really a great person who dares to come here alone." After Xiangtian rushed into the courtyard, she quickly looked around, only to find that the surroundings were extremely wide. After turning a few corners and meeting 2 patrolling monks, she quickly went up to them and told them what had happened at the door with her hands and feet pointing at them. When the 2 monks heard this, they were immediately furious. One of them was about to rush to the door, but soon he was pulled by his companion and said a few words in his ear. When the monk heard this, he immediately turned around and walked inside with him. Xiangtian saw that the 2 of them had left so quickly that they didn't even care about her. She rolled her eyes and simply followed them and continued to sneak in. Li Yundong, who was waiting at the door, was calm and composed. However, the Japanese reporters around were a little impatient and began to whisper to each other. Just as they were talking, they suddenly heard an angry shout coming from the courtyard. "Li Yundong, how dare you? How dare you hurt the people of Mount Koya here?" When everyone heard this, they immediately looked in the direction of the voice and saw a young monk in a purple cassock, with 2 monks holding vajra, rushing over angrily. "Oh, it's Saionji Tsunekatsu, the youngest and most promising young monk of Jinyin Tantrism." A knowledgeable reporter couldn't help but exclaim in a low voice. Some reporters deliberately said loudly, "Lord Saionji Tsunekatsu, teach this guy a lesson. He is really..." Before they could finish their words, Li Yundong suddenly opened his eyes, and a sharp light flashed in his eyes. With a stomp of his feet, his whole body shot out like a cannonball, instantly appearing less than 3 inches in front of Saionji Tsunekatsu. Before, Li Yundong had stood quietly in the same place. Everyone felt that he was as quiet as a statue or a mountain. But at this time, this Chinese man suddenly burst out. His momentum was like a gale and a raging fire, and his movement was like a thunderstorm. Saionji Tsunekatsu had never expected that Li Yundong would not only dare to hurt people in the core hinterland of Mount Koya, but also dare to attack him. This was simply audacious. But Li Yundong did it in a place and time that no one had expected. The battle between masters was only a hair's breadth. Li Yundong's cultivation was above that of Saionji Tsunekatsu. At this time, after comprehending the realm, he was even more powerful and difficult to resist. His move was as fast as lightning. Saionji Tsunekatsu saw that Li Yundong seemed to move in an instant. His body appeared in front of him and his palm hit his head. This palm seemed to suck in all the air around it in an instant, forming a vacuum vortex. The force was so fierce and the momentum was so fast that the air around it was squeezed and distorted. Saionji Tsunekatsu was shocked. With a shout, he lifted his hands up. The 2 monks beside him also reacted very quickly, and the vajra in their hands smashed toward Li Yundong. "You dare to steal treasures on the land of China. Why can't I beat you to death on your land?" Li Yundong shouted and didn't dodge at all. His palm met the palm of Saionji Tsunekatsu. Suddenly, there was a loud bang. The place where the 2 palms wanted to meet suddenly released a powerful airflow, instantly blowing the 2 monks beside them to both sides. Li Yundong's blood was surging, and his jinshi was pouring out like a mountain torrent. His palm was like Mount Tai, slowly pressing towards Saionji Tsunekatsu's head. Saionji Tsunekatsu's bones crackled, as if there were tens of thousands of pounds of force constantly pressing down on his head. His legs trembled, his arms bent little by little, and his handsome face became distorted. "Kneel down and apologize." Li Yundong glared at him angrily, added strength to his palm again, and shouted angrily, "In addition, hand over the Medicine King tripod. Otherwise, I will smash you into meat paste." After he shouted, his whole body surged with great strength, and at once, Saionji Tsunekatsu's 2 knees made a cracking sound of bones breaking, and then he knelt in front of him with a thud. At this time, all the people on the scene were stunned. They couldn't believe their eyes. The young monk of Jinyin Tantrism was beaten to his knees in one face-to-face encounter. Chapter 633. Everyone watched helplessly as the ever-victorious vajra of Jinyin Tantrism was slapped to the ground by Li Yundong's palm. Although he was still resisting, even a blind man could see that if Li Yundong wanted to, he could slap the so-called ever-victorious vajra into meat paste with one palm. Saionji Tsunekatsu was the best of the young and strong in Mount Koya. He was shrewd, capable, brave and courageous, and deeply trusted by Kaisai Hikaryoshi and Masako Tachibana. But neither Kaisai Hikaryoshi nor Masako Tachibana had expected that their most trusted young and strong faction would provoke a terrible devil for them. What was even more unexpected was that their ever-victorious vajra had been beaten to kneel on the ground in front of the world. What a great shame and humiliation this was. All the Japanese present were shocked and angry. They roared one after another. Some of the female reporters also showed pity on their faces and said, "Stop fighting, stop it. The male reporters roared loudly, bastard, are you looking for death? Stop it, he's going to die. Li Yundong looked at Saionji Tsunekatsu's handsome face in front of him, and his face became distorted. He bent down slightly, stared at him gloomily, and asked in a cold voice, when you snatched treasures on the land of China, did you ever think that this day would come? Li Yundong's voice was not loud, but it was clearly heard by everyone. Although many of the Japanese present did not understand what he was saying, they felt a kind of piercing murderous intent from Li Yundong's tone. Saionji Tsunekatsu's face turned purple. He didn't dare to open his mouth at all, for fear that as soon as he opened his mouth, the breath in his chest would leak out, and all the strength in his body would collapse. Once he lost his resistance, he would definitely be smashed into meat paste by the madman in front of him. His own death was a trivial matter. For a monk who believed in reincarnation, death was just the beginning of another life. However, as a young monk of Mount Koya, he was smashed into meat paste by a naked man at the gate of the royal courtyard. The shame left behind could not be eliminated even if he died 10,000 times. It was also because of this thought that although the bones of Saionji Tsunekatsu's calf and knee bones were almost broken, he was still struggling to support himself. His whole person was in a state of blurred consciousness. Only the thought of never admit defeat was struggling to support his subconscious and body. Although Li Yundong hated Saionji Tsunekatsu's surliness and arrogance, and hated him even more for stealing the Medicine King tripod under his nose, he saw that Saionji Tsunekatsu was about to collapse, but he was still struggling to hold on. He couldn't help but sigh at the toughness of this person's bones. Li Yundong saw that Saionji Tsunekatsu refused to give in, so he sneered and said, "You don't want to say it? Then I'm sorry." After saying that, his palm once again pressed down forcefully. Crack, 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 crack. The bones all over Saionji Tsunekatsu's body sounded like firecrackers. Everyone felt as if Saionji Tsunekatsu had been placed in a compressor, and the bones all over his body were pressed to the point of bursting with a burst of crisp sounds. Although they didn't see any blood, the stimulation of the sound was more terrifying and creepy than letting them see the sea of blood. Everyone covered their faces and didn't dare to look again. Saionji Tsunekatsu also let out an extremely painful roar. After this roar, his whole body fell to the ground softly, like a mollusk without a bone in his body. As soon as Saionji Tsunekatsu fell, a group of monks in purple cassocks rushed to the courtyard gate. One of them had a wrinkled face and looked quite old. It was the monk who had dealt with Zhou Qin under the fundamental tower. As soon as he saw Saionji Tsunekatsu, he suddenly widened his eyes and exclaimed, "Tsunekatsu." The old monk's eyes seemed to be about to spit out flames. He roared at Li Yundong, "What did you do to him?" When the other monks saw this scene, they were all furious. One by one, they showed their powerful magical weapons and surrounded Li Yundong. As long as the old monk gave the order, they would rush up and chop this bold murderer into meat paste. Li Yundong glanced around coldly and sneered, "Do you want to fight now?" "Okay." With a move of his mind, the fan of 7 treasures and the Lyoha sword instantly jumped out of the colorful brocade bag around his waist. The Lyoha sword instantly split, staring at him like a tiger watching its prey. When the reporters on the scene saw this scene, they were shocked, and the natural instinct of the reporters in their bodies suddenly burned. Many reporters began to shoot the scene in front of them like crazy, and even some reporters began to explain to the camera. Seeing this scene, the old monk suddenly frowned and shouted at the reporters, "Bastard, what are you doing?" Which ordinary person could see this kind of scene even once? Even if they lived for several lifetimes, they might not be able to see it once. At this time, these reporters' eyes were shining. Even if His Majesty the Mikado came at this time, they might not immediately stop shooting. How could they listen to him? The old monk was furious, and all his anger poured out on Li Yundong's head. He pointed at Li Yundong and shouted angrily, "Catch this murderer." "Yes." The surrounding monks shouted in unison. Just as they were about to step forward, they heard a voice laughing from not far away. "Oh, it turns out that there is a good show here. I almost missed it." When everyone heard this voice, they subconsciously looked at the man, only to see that he was coming from not far away. He was about 40 years old and was wearing a rather sloppy wanderer's costume. His hands were folded in front of him, and he walked over with a careless look, talking with a cheeky smile on his face. Behind this man stood a tall woman in a white witch costume and a long red dress. This woman's lips were painted with bright red lipstick, and her face was smeared with white powder. Although her appearance was a little strange with makeup, from her facial features and small face, it could be vaguely recognized that she was an extremely beautiful girl. However, this girl's expression was cold, and her eyes were cold. She looked at the scene in front of her like a god looking down at the common people. There were knowledgeable reporters among them. When they saw the family runes on the woman's loose witch costume, they couldn't help but exclaim, "She's the goddess of Ise Shinto." They exclaimed, but a faint voice came from the courtyard. What happened? Why is it so noisy? Everyone turned around and saw a woman wearing a white wide-sleeved top and a red ruffled skirt. She was wearing wooden clogs and was slowly walking over. This woman looked to be about 30 years old. She was quite beautiful, and her eyebrows were full of dignified momentum. Every time she took a step, the air around her seemed to tremble because of her arrival. This woman was Masako Tachibana, who had never met an opponent in the Japanese cultivation world. Wherever Masako Tachibana went, no matter who it was, they would subconsciously avoid her, as if there was an invisible position around her that would push them away. Only when Masako Tachibana walked to Li Jiandong's side, Li Jiandong stood steadily in the same place like a solid rock, looking at her indifferently. Masako Tachibana quickly glanced at Sayonji Tsunekatsu. She frowned secretly, but there was no reaction on her face. She quickly looked up at the woman in front of her, who was also wearing a witch costume, and a smile appeared on her face. It turns out that Miss Chuyun is here. Please come in. Chuyun glanced at Masako Tachibana coldly, and a trace of hostility flashed in her eyes. Her face seemed to be frozen, without any expression. Then she quickly moved her eyes to Li Jiandong, as if to say, "You still have a guest here." Ise Shinto was one of the most powerful sects in the Japanese Shintoism. At that time, it was precisely because of the strong suppression and exclusion of the Ise Shinto that the Masako family and the monks of the Jinyin Tantrism converged and took over the power of the gods worshipped by the Jinyin Tantrism and rose strongly. After the rise of the Masako family, the first thing they did was to suppress the Ise Shinto. The power of the Ise Shinto came from the gods of the Shintoism. Although the number of the gods worshipped in Japan was more than that of Buddhism. However, the strongest god of the Shintoism, Amaterasu Great God, was the god of a country in Japan. Except for the Japanese, no one worshipped him. However, the god of the Jinyin Tantrism was the wisdom king of Buddha. These gods were not only worshipped by the Japanese, but also China, India, and even many countries in the world. As the saying goes, people fight for a breath, and Buddhas fight for an incense stick. People live to fight for a breath, to prove that they are stronger than others. The same was true of the Buddha. This Buddha had more incense stick than other Buddhas, which meant that the power of the Buddha's Dharma was also greater, and the godhood was also higher. It was said that the Buddha was compassionate and had no anger at all, but in fact, the cultivators of Buddhism were more fierce than anyone else in private. Otherwise, why would the Buddhists in the Chinese cultivation world hold an open meeting? Why would the ancient meaning school and the new meaning school of the Jinyin Tantrism run for the chief supervisor? Because of this, on one side was the narrow-minded Amaterasu Great God, and on the other side was the universal wisdom king of Buddha. Compared with the two, the difference between the two was obvious. This was also the reason why Masako Tachibana had been invincible in Japan for so many years. Because of this, all the great priests and goddesses of the Shintoism regarded the Tachibana family as apostates and were deeply hostile to them. Masako Tachibana naturally knew this, so after exchanging some pleasantries with Chuyun, she turned her eyes to Li Yunyang and said coldly, "Genuinely, I invited you here with good intentions. Is this how you treat your guests? You Chinese people boast about being a country of etiquette. Humph, last time your disciple hurt our monks at the gate of the mountain, and this time you hurt our young monk at the foot of His Majesty the Mikado. Is this your etiquette? Have all of you forgotten sage Confucius's teachings? It's said that you Chinese people have long forgotten your roots. Now it seems that it's true. If you don't give us an explanation today, do you think you can still leave here? At the end of the Qing dynasty and the beginning of the Republic of China, after the May 4th movement, the Long-Term War, the great leap forward in the early days of the founding of the People's Republic, the essence of Confucian culture was almost lost. But like Tangmi, when China lost its traditional culture, the Japanese people respected the Confucian culture of China for thousands of years and slowly absorbed it into their own culture. There were three major beliefs in Japan. The first was Shintoism, the second was Buddhism, and the third was Confucian belief. Even Master Hongfa once went to Kyoto to learn Confucian culture. It could be said that the mainstream cultural ideas of Japan were composed of these three. When Li Yunyang heard Masako Tachibana's words, he burst out laughing and said, "Well said. Yes, our Chinese people do think that we are a country of etiquette." As early as 2,000 years ago, our country and people had already advocated etiquette to rule the country and the world. It is also because of this that we have a prosperous Chinese civilization. But don't forget that Confucius, who advocated etiquette, also said something. This sentence is called, or, how about repaying evil with good? Confucius said, how to repay evil with good. Repay evil with honesty, repay good with good. With a sarcastic smile on the corner of his mouth, Li Yunyang said with mockery and disdain, "Do you know what this sentence means?" The meaning of this sentence is, if a person bullies us and has a grudge against us, do we still need to use morality to reform them? Humph, Confucius said, if people bully us, why should we use morality to report them and reform them? Are you crazy? If they have a grudge against us, then we have to take revenge. If the other party treats us in a moral way, then it's not too late for us to respond in a moral way. As Li Yunyang spoke, his tone suddenly changed. He shouted sharply, in order to force me to come to Mount Koya, your Saionji Tsunekatsu used despicable means to hurt the innocent people of our country and steal the national treasure of our country. Is this your so-called etiquette? Well, I'll tell you. Li Yunyang pointed to Saionji Tsunekatsu, who had turned into a pool of mud under his feet, and shouted angrily, blood for blood, a tooth for a tooth. This is the etiquette of our Chinese people. Chapter 634. Li Yundong's words were sonorous and powerful. He mercilessly exposed Masako Tachibana's trick of wanting to use the power of defeating Li Yundong to deter other cultivation sections. Moreover, there was no dirty word in Li Yundong's words, but every word was like a throwing dagger, and every sentence was like an axe, knife, and fork, which was so sharp that people couldn't resist it. Even Masako Tachibana, who was used to seeing great storms, had her face turn blue and white for a while. She gritted her teeth and looked at Saionji Tsunekatsu with hatred. She wanted to burn this guy's bones to ashes immediately. Why didn't he tell me about this? In Masako Tachibana's opinion, since Li Yundong could beat Saionji Tsunekatsu like this as soon as they met, it was obvious that he was a very powerful opponent. But if the opponent was only good at kung fu and not good at talking, then she could take advantage of the strong advantage of the home court and exert strong psychological pressure on the opponent with words, prompting the opponent to make mistakes in the next fight. Although Masako Tachibana was arrogant and conceited, she did not underestimate the enemy. She knew very well that she could not lose this battle. Otherwise, the Masako family would probably be doomed forever. However, Li Yundong's sharp words made Masako Tachibana dispel the idea of fighting with him in an instant. Masako Tachibana said hatefully, before, his disciple was also a sharp-tongued person. I didn't expect that his master was also a sharp-tongued person. Damn it. If you lose later, I'll beat all your teeth out. Although many of the Japanese people in the surrounding area didn't understand Li Yundong's Chinese, when they saw Li Yundong and Masako Tachibana, one was righteous and the other was angry, they couldn't help but be full of doubts for a while and whispered. What happened between them? Could it be that Masako Tachibana really did something shameful? Bastard, does Masako Tachibana need to do such a thing? Then, why is this happening? How do I know? The middle-aged man standing next to the ISE Shinto goddess took advantage of the situation and said with a smile, "It turns out that you have such a skill. Amazing, really amazing. As expected of an apostate, you can do anything." Masako Tachibana was so angry that she glared at the middle-aged man fiercely. A sharp light also flashed in the middle-aged man's eyes. Suddenly, there was a boom in front of them, as if a bomb had exploded out of thin air. A wave of air spread in all directions, causing the reporters around to take a few steps back in horror. At this time, Masako Tachibana couldn't get out of the stage, but she heard a kind and solemn voice coming from behind her. At this time, she heard a kind and solemn voice came from behind, Amitba. Everyone looked in the direction of the voice and saw an old monk wearing a gold-rimmed red robe walking out slowly. He was the 413th monk of the Jinyan Tantrism, Jinyan Gomi. Amos, Kai Chi Sheng, 1 Yundong, Li, 1, aimingly, Shi, Yu, A, Yundong, said. Li, 1, and 1, A, 1, A, Yundong, Yun, and 1. After returning the salute to them one by one, Kai Chi Sheng put his palms together and said to Li Yundong, "Generally, even if there is a grudge, why don't we solve it in the subsequent battle? As the saying goes, revenge is revenge. Changsheng has been beaten like this by you. Even if there is a great sin, it should offset each other." Li Yundong sneered and said, "Where is the Medicine King tripod? Return the Medicine King tripod first." Kai Chi Sheng hesitated for a moment and didn't say anything. Li Yundong seemed to know what he was thinking. He sneered and said, "Don't worry. Since I'm here, I will fulfill my promise and fight with you, so that you can know whether there are masters in the Chinese cultivation world. But before that, you have to return the Medicine King tripod to me. Because it should have been a powerful magical weapon of China." Kai Chi Sheng nodded slightly and turned to a monk beside him. "Go to Changsheng's room and have a look." Seeing that Kai Chi Sheng had actually listened to Li Yundong's words, the monk couldn't help but be anxious and said, "Great monk. How can you let A?" Before he could finish his words, Kai Chi Sheng glanced at him slightly. Although his gaze was not sharp, it made the monk not dare to say anything more. After glaring at Li Yundong with hatred, he turned around and left. Not long after, the monk came back with a purple gold tripod furnace in his hand. Kai Chi Sheng took it from his hand, smiled slightly, and held the Medicine King tripod in front of Li Yundong with both hands. He said, "Please rest assured, Jinren Li." Li Yundong didn't stand on ceremony. He took the Medicine King tripod and stuffed it into the colorful brocade pouch around his waist. The Medicine King tripod, which was as big as a head, immediately disappeared, causing the Japanese reporters around to widen their eyes and exclaim. Their eyes were fixed on Li Yundong's waist, as if they wanted to see what was there. Seeing that Li Yundong had accepted it, Kai Chi Sheng made a gesture and said, "Jinren Li, please come in." Seeing that the other party was polite, Li Yundong also politely made a gesture and said, "Great monk, please come in." The two of them were hypocritical and polite. If it weren't for the fact that the people around them had seen what had happened between the two sides, they would have thought that they were a pair of good friends who hadn't seen each other for a long time. After Kai Chi Sheng led Li Yundong into the courtyard, the reporters behind him began to make a noise. "Let us in too." "Yes, let us go in together. Why can Chinese people enter our Japanese place, but we can't enter our own?" Kai Chi Sheng frowned slightly. As he led Li Yundong into the courtyard, he said to the monk next to him, "Go and seal the door. Don't let them in." The monk nodded, and soon two monks followed him to the door. After the two men of ISE Shinto entered the courtyard, the three monks blocked the door like a city wall. They put their palms together and closed their eyes. No matter what the reporters said, they didn't move and turned a deaf ear to them. After Li Yundong entered the royal courtyard, he saw that there were tall fir trees around. Some courtyards had been beautifully designed into a garden scene. There were small bridges, flowing water, rockery, and strange rocks. Stone benches, stone tables, and shrines with strong Japanese style could be seen everywhere. Li Yundong followed behind Kaisai Hikariuni. After taking a few turns, he suddenly saw that he had arrived in front of a Japanese building in the shape of a square. This building was only 2 stories high. It had cornices and arches, black tiles and red pillars. The upper floor was carved with jade and hollowed windows. Downstairs was a corridor and a hall without sliding doors. At a glance, he could see that there were many people sitting on the tatami in each room. Some of these people were wearing monk robes, while others were wearing Shintoist robes and witch robes. There were probably 200 or 300 men and women, old and young. These people were originally talking and exchanging greetings with each other. At this time, when they saw Li Yundong coming, they immediately stopped talking and looked at Li Yundong in unison. This was where almost all the elite experts of the Japanese cultivation world were. Their gazes were as oppressive as Mount Tai, which could be imagined. However, Li Yundong didn't notice it at all. With a smile on his face, he looked around in a neither servile nor overbearing manner. Li Yundong saw that one of the windows on the second floor on the east side had not been opened, while the windows on the other floors were all open. There were also some people looking down from the windows upstairs. Li Yundong pointed to the window and asked Kai Chi Sheng, who was beside him, "Who's up there?" Kai Chi Sheng smiled faintly. "His Majesty the Mikado and his wife." Li Yundong asked in surprise, "The Mikado of Japan is also here?" Kai Chi Sheng smiled and said, "What's so strange about that?" Masako Tachibana, who had been following behind, said at this time, "Will you feel any pressure fighting in front of the Mikado of Japan?" Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. "He is your Mikado, not mine. If there's pressure, it's your pressure. What does it have to do with me? But you. Aren't you afraid that you will lose to me in front of His Majesty the Mikado and have no place to step down?" Masako Tachibana raised her head and laughed loudly. "That's impossible." After that, she raised her head and walked slowly into the field. At this time, the middle-aged man of Ise Shinto, who was walking behind them, also said to Li Yundong sympathetically, "Young man, I appreciate your courage, but you're..." As he said this, he pointed to his head and sneered, "I don't appreciate your wisdom." Li Yundong asked with great interest, "Oh? Why?" At this time, the goddess of Ise Shinto, who had been as cold as ice, said coldly, "Because smart people will not choose to fight with Masako Tachibana in the main mountain of Jinyin Tantrism. You are courting death foolishly." When Li Yundong saw this goddess at first glance, he felt that she was very cold and elegant. Although she looked young, her behavior and words were like that of an old woman. She was so calm that she was a little strange. Li Yundong asked with a smile, "Why do you say that? Is Masako Tachibana particularly powerful here?" The middle-aged man of Ise Shinto laughed and said, "Are you kidding? No one has ever been able to defeat Masako Tachibana in this place. Here, the power of the gods that Mount Koya has worshipped for thousands of years will become her power. Do you think you can fight against the power of faith that has been accumulated for thousands of years? Don't talk nonsense." As he said this, the middle-aged man looked at Masako Tachibana with complicated eyes and said with emotion, "This is Masako Tachibana's home field. Chinese people, in the away game, it's better to keep a low profile and be honest. I'll give you a suggestion. This suggestion is to admit defeat as soon as possible when the fight begins. The earlier you admit defeat, the greater your chance of survival. Once you make Masako Tachibana angry, it will be your doomsday." Li Yundong laughed and said, "You said that no one has ever won against Masako Tachibana here?" The Ise Divine Lady continued coldly, "Never. Masako Tachibana has never fought with people outside Mount Koya. It turns out to be a teenage mutant ninja turtle." Li Yundong laughed and said, well, today I will be the first person to break her turtle shell in her home field. Seeing that Li Yundong didn't listen to him, the middle-aged man shook his head and muttered in Japanese, "What a stubborn fool. Hopeless." After that, he ignored Li Yundong and turned to the goddess beside him. He said in Japanese, "Chuyun, let's go. This guy is already a dead man. Don't talk to him." At this time, at the gate of the royal courtyard, the reporters of the major Japanese TV stations gradually quieted down after making a ruckus for a while. Some experienced reporters simply began to broadcast live at the gate and introduced what had just happened verbally. Just as they were talking to the camera lens, several hosts who were on the screen were stunned at the same time and looked in one direction. The reporters who were filming also turned their heads curiously, only to see 3 monks wearing bamboo hats, holding Buddhist staffs and cloth shoes slowly walking over behind them. Strange, why are there still people here? Although these reporters were puzzled, some of them reacted quickly. They rushed to the 3 monks and asked loudly, "Excuse me, are you here to attend the meeting inside? Which sect are you cultivators from? Can you take us in with you?" But no matter what they said, the 3 monks kept their heads down, pressed their bamboo hats down, and didn't say a word. Some sharp-eyed reporters were keenly aware that there was a faint fragrance coming from the 3 of them. Moreover, the skin on their necks was as delicate as porcelain when they lowered their heads. They couldn't help but be stunned. They seem to be women. Are they from the Pure Land School? But I've heard that the Pure Land School brings female family members here. I've never heard of 3 women dressed like monks coming together. Who the hell were these 3 fellows? Chapter 635. The 3 people who cast a vote were none other than Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin. According to Zi Yuan's plan, the 3 of them had secretly followed Li Yundong to Mount Koya, and then disguised themselves as the ascetic monks of the Pure Land sect. Because the ascetic monks had to walk all over the world and beg alms along the way, they all wore bamboo hats and held Buddhist staffs in their hands. The bamboo hats could shelter them from the wind and rain, and the Buddhist staffs could help them subdue demons along the way. At the same time, in order to sharpen themselves, all the ascetic monks wore straw sandals, and none of them wore cloth shoes like the 3 of them. With Zi Yuan's meticulousness and Zhou Qin's shrewdness, they naturally thought of this. But when the 3 of them put on the straw sandals, they found that the 6 feet in the straw sandals were delicate and white, like jade and porcelain. They didn't look like the feet of an ascetic monk at all. In particular, the fingernails of Su Chan's toes revealed a charming pink. Even in the simple straw sandals, they looked like 10 small pink petals. The 3 beautiful women looked at each other's feet and had no choice but to find 3 pairs of cloth shoes with a wry smile. Others couldn't see these details. But how could the monks guarding the gate of the courtyard not see these details? How could the ascetic monks of the Pure Land sect wear cloth shoes? The 3 monks stared suspiciously at the cloth shoes on the 3 men's feet, not even blinking for a moment. Su Chan, who was walking in the middle, was stared at by the people around her, and her hair stood on end. She couldn't help whispering, "Sister Zi Yuan, we seem to have been discovered. We can't get in. What should we do?" Zhou Qin, who was behind her, immediately poked her gently under the cover of her body and whispered, "Don't talk." Zi Yuan also transmitted her voice, "Don't talk. Follow me." Zi Yuan walked in the front, still with her head down and her bamboo hat pressed low. Under everyone's gaze, she suddenly turned to another stone road and walked in the other direction of the royal courtyard. Just as Su Chan was about to breathe a sigh of relief, she saw a Japanese reporter pouncing on her and shouting at her. Su Chan was dumbfounded. She didn't understand Japanese, so how could she know what the other party was talking about? Li Yundong could carry a translator with him and put earphones in his ears, but they couldn't. What kind of ascetic from the Japanese Pure Land sect would have earphones in their ears? Not only Su Chan, but Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin also didn't understand Japanese. Their bodies froze and they became highly vigilant. Zhou Qin even subconsciously touched the Vulcan's whip hidden at her waist. Her whole body was covered with xinqi, ready to explode at any time. At this time, the attention of the 3 monks at the entrance of the royal courtyard was focused on the 3 of them. As soon as Zhou Qin mobilized her xinqi, they also felt an inexplicable danger spreading in all directions. They couldn't help but be vigilant. Seeing that the situation in front of her was about to break out, Su Chan suddenly had an idea. She pretended to be profound and pointed at herself with one finger, then shook it again. Then, she turned around and urged anxiously in a very low voice that only Zi Yuan could hear, "Sister Zi Yuan, run." Zi Yuan did not dare to stop and continued to walk forward. The Japanese reporter watched them leave, but he didn't stop them. Instead, he showed a look of realization. At this time, a female reporter came over and asked curiously, "Aoki-kun, why didn't these monks speak?" Aoki smiled proudly and said, "I asked them which sect they were from." The monk in the middle pointed to his mouth and then shook it again. "Do you know what that means?" The female reporter asked, "Does it mean that she is mute?" Aoki laughed and said, "No, no. She means that she is a person who practices silent meditation." The female reporter said with admiration, "So that's how it is." "Aoki-kun, you really know a lot." Aoki smiled and said, "Not at all. What I find strange is that people who practice silent meditation will usually prepare a small wooden sign with the word silence and silence written on it. Once someone comes to talk to them, they will take out the wooden sign. But why don't these people have it?" The female reporter laughed and said, "Maybe they are newcomers?" Aoki looked at the backs of Su Chan and the others, shook his head and sighed. "Maybe 3 female monks are traveling ascetically. It must be very hard." After that, he turned around and stopped looking at Su Chan and the others. Even the 3 monks of Xinyan Tantrism at the gate of the courtyard dispelled their doubts when they saw Su Chan's movements. They turned their heads and no longer looked at them. Su Chan didn't know that she wanted to pretend to be mute, but she accidentally made the other party mistakenly think that she was an ascetic monk who practiced silent meditation. Moreover, among the Buddhist sects in the world, the silent meditation of the Pure Land sect was the most famous. Master Lianqi, an eminent monk of the Ming dynasty and the 8th ancestor of the Pure Land sect, said in his Bamboo Window Essays, "The ancients said that if you don't speak for 20 years, even Buddha can't do anything to you." Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin went far away and came to a remote place. Su Chan patted her chest and said with a frightened face, "I was scared to death. I thought that we would be exposed before Yundong started fighting." Zi Yuan couldn't help but praise, "Su Chan, you did a good job just now. Even I didn't think of using the method of silent meditation to avoid the other party's conversation and inquiry. This is my mistake. Fortunately, you reacted quickly." Zhou Qin couldn't help but tease her with a smile, "Su Chan, you're good. You're usually stupid and don't show your strength. You can be relied on at critical moments." When Su Chan heard Zi Yuan's praise, her face was full of pride. But after hearing the first half of Zhou Qin's words, her face suddenly fell. But when she heard the second half of Zhou Qin's words, her eyes immediately turned into crescent moons. Su Chan said with a smile, "Actually, I want to say that I'm mute and can't speak." Zi Yuan was stunned. "Didn't you think of using silent meditation to avoid it?" Su Chan also said in surprise, "I didn't bring a small wooden plate with me. How could I pretend to be silent?" Zhou Qin couldn't help laughing. "I wanted to praise you for your quick reaction and keen sense of opportunity, but I didn't expect you to be a blind cat bumping into a dead mouse." After Zhou Qin said this, Zi Yuan, who was beside her, couldn't help laughing. "We're really lucky. If those monks come to question us, we'll be in trouble. We have to be careful next time. It's impossible for us to be so lucky all the time. This is the main mountain of Xinyan Tantrism. If we're not careful, we'll be doomed eternally." However, Su Chan didn't realize that she had gone deep into the tiger's den at all. Her eyes were full of excitement and she said with a cheeky smile, "It's okay. Yundong said that I'm a fool, but I'm a fool. Zhou Qin pointed at Su Chan and laughed. You finally admit that you're stupid? Su Chan stamped her feet and said angrily, you're so annoying. The little girl didn't want to be entangled in this topic with Zhou Qin, so she changed the topic and turned to Zi Yuan and asked, Sister Zi Yuan, what should we do now? It seems that things are not in the plan now. Zi Yuan thought for a moment and said, it's also in the plan now. Just now, I was just testing to see the attitude and vigilance of the monks at the door. Now it seems that they are very vigilant. Let's wait here. I don't believe that their vigilance will still be so high when the fighting begins. Zhou Qin also nodded in agreement. That's right. Who doesn't want to see the duel between two top masters? All the masters in the Japanese cultivation world are here, let alone them. Su Chan also said with some excitement, then we'll take action after the fighting begins. Zhou Qin laughed. Su Chan, I didn't expect that what you said before we came here, 3 cobblers are better than 1, would really come true. Su Chan made a face at Zhou Qin and said, it's 3 cobblers. Zhou Qin laughed. Zi Yuan smiled and said in a low voice, don't laugh. Keep a low profile. Don't attract other people's attention. There are still a lot of monks patrolling the mountain here. Before she could finish her words, 2 monks came over from not far away. The 2 monks saw the 3 of them at a glance and saluted them from afar. Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin also saluted back. Then, they continued to lower their bamboo hats and quickly hid themselves in the dense fir forest. At this time, an uninvited guest came to the Qingming Shrine in the Shangjing district of Kyoto, Japan. Lu Yi slowly got off the Japanese bus and arrived at his destination, the Violent Bridge bus station. At first glance, he saw that the famous Violent Bridge was an extremely ordinary asphalt bridge. The water under the bridge had long dried up, and only the railings at the head of the bridge were written in Chinese characters. Lu Yi couldn't help but sigh in a low voice. The residence of the famous Abe no Saimai has become like this now. I wonder if there are any shikigami or shikigami of the Onmyoji hidden under this violent bridge? After the death of the famous Onmyoji in Japan, Abe no Saimai, the Onmyoji, moved his residence here, which was at the intersection of Yumen Road and Zaidanjuan Road in Heian capital at that time. Lu Yi looked around and saw that this place was the Gen position in the northeast of the Imperial Palace, which was also commonly known as the Gate of Hell. As a professional Onmyoji, the purpose of moving his residence here was to coordinate with the Gen position in the northeast of Kyoto, which was located in the Gen position, to form a double deterrent to prevent demons from invading and to prevent demons from breaking through the seal. Lu Yi laughed and said, good method, good method. I was wondering why you hid the soul of the mystical silver fox here. So that's how it is, so that's how it is. Abe no Saimai, although the mystical silver fox was not sealed by you, but you are really a far-sighted person. Could it be that you predicted that there would be such a catastrophe in Japan in 100 years, so you moved your residence here? Lu Yi seemed to be full of a kind of unconcealable pride that he was about to succeed. He whispered to himself. When the Japanese passing by saw him whispering to himself, they thought he was a psychopath. After looking at him strangely, they avoided him. Lu Yi didn't mind. While looking at the surrounding scenery, he slowly walked to the Qingming Shrine. In Lu Ye's opinion, compared with many shrines in Japan, Abe no Saimai's burial shrine was extremely small. Next to the shrine, there were even ordinary residential houses. There was only a stone tablet and a stone archway at the entrance of the shrine, with 4 Chinese characters written vertically and horizontally on it, Qingming Shrine. After entering the Qingming Shrine, he saw a very small stone bridge in the courtyard. It was called the Evil Bridge, but it was just a miniature version of the original bridge outside. Beside the miniature bridge, there was even a white screen for tourists to take photos. On the screen, there was a scene of Qingming driving ghosts. The face was deliberately circular and hollowed out. Some tourists were gathering behind the screen to show their faces, pretending to be Qingming or a little ghost, to take photos for fun. Compared with some ancient shrines, this shrine, which had existed for nearly 1,000 years, had been renovated. It looked brand new and clean everywhere, without the slightest sense of historical antiquity. On the other hand, there were some snack shops full of classical Japanese flavor, which added a different charm to the shrine. Lu Yi walked to the front of the Qingming shrine and came to a stone tablet that was placed in the corner. This stone tablet was ordinary, but there was a deep and bright red pentagonal pattern engraved on it. This was also the unique pattern of the Yin-Yang Master, which was used to subdue demons. Lu Yi looked at the bright red pentagonal pattern on the big stone tablet. He laughed in a low voice and said, "Who could have imagined that? In such an inconspicuous place, the strongest nine-tailed celestial fox in thousands of years is sealed?" At this time, behind Lu Yi, some tourists from foreign countries and other places in Japan were still happily taking photos of the various pocket-sized attractions of the Qingming shrine and pointing at the surrounding scenery. Some vendors in snack shops greeted the guests warmly. The fragrance from the shop wafted out and lingered around the Japanese-style lanterns at the door, revealing a peaceful and festive atmosphere everywhere. But none of them knew that soon, in front of them, there would be a demon who had set off a huge wave in both China and Japan. The cultivation world of China and Japan would usher in a bloody storm. Well, I got up early this morning and quickly updated a chapter, because in the afternoon, I have to rush to Nanjing to attend the youth creation meeting of the Jiangsu Writers Association. As a new member, I can't be late, right? The youth creation meeting is scheduled to report on the 23rd. The meeting will be held on the 24th and 25th, and they will return to Suzhou on the 26th. In the next few days, I will try my best to keep updating. If there is any delay, please forgive me. Thank you very much. Chapter 636. Just after Lu Yi arrived at the Qingming Shrine, in the royal courtyard of Mount Koya of Xinyan Tantrism, a battle that shocked the entire Japanese cultivation world was about to begin. Because this battle had been planned by Masako Tachibana and Kaisai Hikariuni for a long time, and all the famous figures of various sects had gathered together, even the Mikado and his wife were watching from the tall building, it was naturally impossible for this battle to be like a street gangster, and it was also impossible for ordinary cultivators to fight each other without saying a word. Before a battle, Xinyan Tantrism and the Masako family had to hold a long and tedious ritual ceremony. After a group of monks of Xinyan Tantrism finished reciting Buddhist scriptures, Masako Tachibana slowly went to the stage with a bell in one hand and a gold and silver fan in the other. She danced the unique divine music dance of Shintoism in the field. Her daughter, Tachibana Wakako, was also dancing with Masako Tachibana. Both of them were wearing witch costumes with white shirts and red skirts. They had the same long black hair. Because they were going to dance, they did not wear wooden clogs and white cotton socks on their feet. Because Tachibana Wakako was quite precocious, although she was not old, she was not short. Moreover, like her mother, she had long black hair like a waterfall. Therefore, when they stood together, they looked no different from sisters. Although Li Yundong was in the tiger's den, he was not afraid at all. He saw that the monks around him were holding sticks in both hands and beating the drum rhythm with a clear sense of rhythm. Masako Tachibana and Tachibana Wakako were dancing in the drum sound. Even an enemy like Li Yundong had to admit that the dance of the mother and daughter was beautiful and pleasing to the eye. When the Japanese cultivators of various sects saw Li Yundong standing in the field and watching for a while, they simply sat down cross-legged and watched the divine music dance of Masako Tachibana and Tachibana Wakako with great interest. When they saw the place where they were full of interest, they applauded and laughed loudly. They praised them loudly, as if they were at home, without the feeling of being in the tiger's den. Although these cultivators had different opinions about Li Yundong's method of hurting people in Mount Koya, they saw that Li Yundong could still be so calm in such a situation, as if there was no one else around. This bearing, calmness, broad-mindedness and courage were really difficult for ordinary people to compare with. They couldn't help but praise him secretly. The middle-aged man from ISE Shinto sighed softly and said, "This person must be one of the best in the Chinese cultivation world. Amazing." Sure enough, Senior Yun has the courage to go to the single blade meeting alone. He is a true hero. Chu Yun, who had been as cold as ice, also nodded slightly and said, if his nerves aren't as thick as steel pipes, then he must be a fool. The middle-aged man sighed. We have to think of a way to save his life. We can't let such a hero fall here. While the two of them were talking, Masako Tachibana and Tachibana Wakako had already finished dancing. They saluted and stepped down from the stage. Although there were many hostile cultivators around, they still applauded politely and praised them loudly. Before stepping down from the stage, Tachibana Wakako quietly glanced at Li Yundong, only to see that he was nodding at her with a smile on his face. His eyes were full of praise, as if there had never been any conflict between them. Tachibana Wakako's face turned slightly red, and she couldn't help but take 2 steps forward. After she and Masako Tachibana walked to the backyard below the stage, she turned around and whispered to Masako Tachibana, Mom, can you? When the words came to her mouth, she couldn't help but hesitate for a moment. She bit her lips gently with her white teeth, as if she didn't know what to say next. Masako Tachibana said coldly, do you want to plead for him? Tachibana Wakako looked at her mother eagerly. Can't I? Masako Tachibana snorted coldly and said, childish. After that, she walked into the room in the backyard without looking back. The door seemed to be pushed by a pair of invisible hands and closed automatically with a crash. Tachibana Wakako looked disappointed. She turned her head to look at Li Yundong and sighed secretly. At this time, a soft voice came from beside her. What's wrong? Is Masako still determined to go her own way? Tachibana Wakako turned her head and saw Tsuruko Tachibana whispering to her with a worried face. Tachibana Wakako shook her head and said, Mom is now blinded by anger and can't be persuaded. Tsuruko Tachibana sighed softly and said, alas. She always thinks that we are angry with us for helping an outsider, but what she doesn't understand is that we are helping her. Did you tell her that Li Yundong is the reincarnation of Wisdom King? Tachibana Wakako nodded and said, yes. Tsuruko Tachibana said in surprise, then she didn't react at all? Tachibana Wakako's face was full of worry. She doesn't believe me at all. What can I do? She thinks it's an excuse. Tsuruko Tachibana sighed, shook his head, and stopped talking. After waiting on the field for about 10 minutes, Li Yundong saw Kaisai Hikaryoshi come up with a scroll in his hand. After talking for a while in a rhythmic tone, Masako Tachibana slowly came to the field and stood about 10 meters opposite Li Yundong. After Kaisai Hikaryoshi bowed to Li Yundong and Masako Tachibana, he slowly retreated. The cultivators who were talking in low voices around them also quieted down. They knew that an amazing battle was about to begin. Li Yundong saw that the courtyard was suddenly so quiet that he could hear a pin drop. Masako Tachibana stood quietly opposite him, her hands in her sleeves, and her eyes were lowered, as if she didn't take Li Yundong seriously at all. The field was extremely quiet. There was only a gust of wind blowing, and a fiery red maple tree in the middle of the courtyard was making a strange rustling sound of leaves. Around Li Yundong, a faint golden light that was visible to the naked eye was slowly released. This golden light surrounded Li Yundong's whole body, making him look like a shining golden Buddha. A strange white light slowly flowed out of Masako Tachibana's long sleeves. This white light enveloped her like smoke, and her figure was looming. Both of them were very cautious at such an important moment, because both of them were great cultivators with extremely high cultivation quotients. Even if there was no one around to watch, once something went wrong, it would be a matter of eternal damnation. What's more, for both Li Yundong and Masako Tachibana, this was a battle that they couldn't afford to lose. They could only win, not lose. It was also because of this that the two of them were in a stalemate in the field, 10 meters away from each other, motionless. Only the jinshi in their bodies kept gushing out and extending to each other little by little. The jinshi of the two of them was like their tentacles, slowly extending to each other's domain. They probed forward bit by bit, seeming extremely cautious. The surrounding Japanese cultivators of various sects did not feel bored. Instead, they all widened their eyes and watched as the white chi and the golden light slowly approached each other. They all knew that once these two chis came into contact with each other, it would immediately be a stormy sea, and the sky would be filled with wind and clouds. Li Yundong's golden light and Masako Tachibana's white chi were like two snakes of different colors, winding along. When they were about to climb to the maple tree in the middle of the courtyard, Masako Tachibana's white chi suddenly moved. She suddenly shrank back, like a poisonous snake about to attack, raised her head, and then shot out like a sharp arrow. When Li Jiandong saw that Masako Tachibana's chi shrank back, he immediately understood his opponent's intention, and suddenly rushed forward without warning. Masako Tachibana's cultivation was originally higher than Li Yundong's, and the fight between masters was only a hair's breadth. Although she shrank back, the sudden burst of speed still gave her the upper hand in an instant. Her chi immediately passed over the maple tree and rushed toward Li Yundong like a raging tide. As soon as her chi passed over the maple tree, the leaves of the maple tree with fiery red leaves instantly turned yellow. The maple leaves withered, and even the trunk shrunk, making a creaking sound, as if it could not bear the torture of this chi. Because Li Yundong had lost the first opportunity, his golden jinchi was surged by Masako Tachibana's chi, which was like a raging wave. He immediately retreated step by step and quickly retreated like an ebbing tide. Although his opponent had taken the initiative, Li Yundong did not panic at all. He saw that the white chi was approaching quickly, especially when it was 2 meters away from him. The white chi suddenly surged up like a huge wave and slammed toward Li Yundong like a tsunami. Everyone could vaguely see countless ghost faces roaring ferociously in the tsunami. Countless dead souls instantly let out earth-shattering roars that shook the heavens and the earth. The cultivators who were familiar with the strength of Masako Tachibana from various sects suddenly changed their expressions and said with awe, "It seems that Masako Tachibana really wants to win this duel." She actually used her unique skill at the beginning. Ever since the Ju family had merged with Xinyan Tantrism, they had been able to dispatch ghosts and gods at will by virtue of their own psychic bloodline and physique. In the whole of Japan, there was no place more concentrated than Xinyan Tantrism. Moreover, the 100,000 ghosts that had accumulated for thousands of years were so terrifying. Each of these faces was the ghost that had been worshipped in Mount Koya for thousands of years. If any of them occupied the edge, they would be turned into dregs and devoured until there was no ash left. With this move alone, Masako Tachibana had defeated countless masters in the cultivation world. Seeing this move, everyone couldn't help looking at Li Jiandong. Many people's eyes had even regarded Li Jiandong as a corpse, because they didn't believe that a Chinese cultivator like Li Jiandong could survive under such a terrifying move. Li Jiandong saw the tsunami-like ghosts pouncing on him. Although there was no threat on his left, right, and back, he could dodge this fierce blow if he dodged a little. But Li Jiandong knew that this was Masako Tachibana's trick. Masters could lose the first opportunity in a battle, but they couldn't lose their momentum. Although he had lost the first opportunity, he could still gain the upper hand. But once he lost his momentum, he would be doomed eternally. As the saying goes, the commander of the 3 armies can be taken away, but an ordinary man can't take away his ambition. That's the truth. You're ruthless, I'm more ruthless than you. You're fierce, I'm fiercer than you. Li Jiandong suddenly opened his eyes and put his palms together. The fingernails of the second ring finger and the second little finger were put together into his palms. The second index finger was attached to the back of the second middle finger, and the thumb was erected, forming the shape of 3 eyes. In an instant, it formed the light-gathering Buddha's top Mahamudra, which symbolized the light of Tathagata, which could shine through the darkness of all living beings, break through all obstacles, and dispel the ghosts that were difficult to deal with. Li Jiandong glared at the sea of ghosts in front of him, recited the mantra, and shouted, "Ming Mo. San Man Duo no Tuanan. Ming Ling. Di Ru Luo Wu Sanisa. Sa He." This mantra was quickly shouted out, and each word spewed out an extremely powerful Buddhist power. As soon as Li Jiandong's light-gathering Buddha's top Mahamudra was displayed, a flash of golden light shot out from the top of his head. The golden light rushed straight to the sky, and then quickly shot straight from the sky to the ground. In an instant, Li Jiandong and the sea of ghosts in front of him were enveloped in it. When the 100,000 ghosts were shown by the golden light falling from the sky, they immediately wailed and turned into countless black smoke in an instant, scattering and fleeing. When everyone saw that Li Jiandong's shout had easily resolved the killing skill of Masako Tachibana, who had defeated countless masters, they couldn't help but burst into an uproar. They all said in surprise, "Mantra Mahamudra? Who the hell is this person?" But as soon as they finished speaking, they saw the golden light that had fallen to the ground quickly transform into a solid golden palm, which covered the sky and the earth and slapped toward Masako Tachibana. This palm was like a huge meteorite falling from the sky. It was so fast that there were even raging flames on the side of the palm. The Japanese cultivators on the scene saw that Li Jiandong's palm was terrifying to the extreme, and its power was so strong that it was suffocating. It was as if this palm would turn the courtyard into ashes. They immediately stood up in shock. Although many people had a grudge against Masako Tachibana, this battle was not only a battle between the Xinyan Tantrism and the Chinese cultivators, but also a battle between the Japanese cultivation world and the Chinese cultivation world. If they were knocked to the ground by this Chinese person, it would be a great shame for the entire Japanese cultivation world. They saw that Li Jiandong's palm fell from the sky in the blink of an eye and instantly engulfed Masako Tachibana. They couldn't help but be shocked in their hearts. Masako Tachibana won't be defeated like this, will she? How could this Chinese person be so powerful? Chapter 637. Everyone saw that Masako Tachibana's figure was instantly swallowed up by Li Yundong's light-gathering Buddha top Mahamudra, and then there was a loud bang on the ground. The ground of the royal courtyard was like a carpet that had been shaken hard, and a wave suddenly rose. Even the tourists at the foot of the mountain felt a tremor, as if there was an earthquake. The Japanese reporters at the gate of the royal courtyard of Mount Koya were even more shocked to see the abnormality of the golden light in the sky, and they loudly explained to the camera. At this time, the three monks who had been guarding the door also turned their heads at the same time and looked at the golden light shining down from the sky in surprise. They secretly whispered to each other, guessing the origin of the golden light, and their eyes were full of strong yearning. Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin, who were hiding in the dense forest of Mount Koya, also felt that two powerful auras had already fought. Su Chan raised her head and said nervously, "I wonder how Yundong is doing." "Sister Zi Yuan, hurry up and cast the spell." Zi Yuan quickly took out a glass mirror with cracks on its surface from her sleeve. It was the glass mirror of heaven that she had used to help Li Yundong block the terrible heaven's tribulation. Although the glass mirror of heaven had been shattered by the power of the heavenly tribulation and had lost almost all of its magic power, it still had some special abilities, such as the ability to see the surroundings with the help of the caster's power. Zi Yuan wiped the mirror with her hand, and the glass mirror of heaven immediately surged with white mist. In the white mist, a somewhat vague picture gradually appeared. It was the scene of Li Yundong and Masako Tachibana fighting. Zhou Qin widened her eyes and said, "That's Master. Where's Masako Tachibana? Why didn't I see her?" Su Chan said in surprise, "Could it be that Yundong has already won? The mantra Mahamudra just now was so powerful." However, Zi Yuan shook her head and said, "If we can defeat Masako Tachibana in this way, then the Japanese cultivation world will become a big joke." As soon as Zi Yuan's voice fell, she saw a burst of rumbling smoke, and the figure of Masako Tachibana gradually appeared. Her whole body was surrounded by boiling white gas, and her long black hair rose into the sky like an upside-down waterfall. Her originally dark eyes also became extremely red. Masako Tachibana was obviously enraged by Li Jiandong's attack. Her angry voice shook the sky. "You're courting death." The voice of Masako Tachibana sounded as if countless people were shouting angrily at the same time. The whole Mount Koya suddenly trembled. Then the colorful clouds in the sky and the Xidagarba in Chi hidden deep in the forest of Mount Koya quickly rushed toward Masako Tachibana, as if she had turned into a huge whirlpool, absorbing the surrounding aura into her body. Soon, there were many atomized Masako Tachibana in front of Masako Tachibana. Up, down, left and right, they surrounded Li Jiandong densely. Mount Koya was one of the 2 divine mountains in Japan. It was full of spiritual chi of heaven and earth. For thousands of years, it had been influenced by the incense of Jinyin Tantrism, and it was even more spiritual. At this time, Masako Tachibana mobilized the spiritual chi of Mount Koya and the noble spirit of the sky. When these 2 auras gathered together, each of her avatars looked majestic. An aggressive pressure came over her face, which was unstoppable. These Masako Tachibana were holding all kinds of weapons. Some were holding Vajra pestles, some were holding Buddhist staffs, some were holding alms bowls, and some were holding flags, yin-yang fan and other powerful magical weapons of Shintoism. In an instant, they rushed toward Li Jiandong from all directions. Li Jiandong saw that there were avatars of Masako Tachibana in all directions, and the power of each avatar was no less than that of her real body. He was suddenly shocked and knew that this was one of the characteristics of Jinshin fighting methods. Because Jinshin masters had already comprehended the truth of cultivation and reached the realm of the unity of heaven and man, they had broken through the restrictions of the laws of nature in fighting methods. They could instantly use the power of the 5 elements of heaven and earth and even the power of thunder and lightning. In the blink of an eye, they could form a situation of fighting more than one person and destroy their opponent in an instant with the power of thunder and lightning. If the opponent was not a Jinshin master, or if he had not comprehended the profound meaning of Jinshin fighting methods, they would instantly fall into an extremely passive situation. Even if he had a yang spirit body with 3 heads and 6 arms, he would not be able to resist such a stormy attack. Even if a yang spirit master wanted to fight for his life and directly attack the opponent's real body, because the opponent had a Jinshin body to protect him, his magic and powerful magical weapons might not be able to cause a fatal blow to the opponent. Therefore, they could not attack or defend. This was why it was said that even 10 yang spirits could not defeat a Jinshin body. At this time, Li Yundong had already comprehended the mystery of Jinshin fighting methods. His Jinshi surged unhurriedly, and the yang spirit instantly came out of its shell. In an instant, it transformed into countless yang spirit clones, all of which pinched the immovable fundamental seal with their hands. Each of the yang spirits was shining with golden light. It was as if a golden wall had appeared around Li Yundong in an instant, firmly protecting his real body in it. It was impregnable up, down, left, and right. The avatar of Masako Tachibana collided with the avatar of Li Jiandong's eyes like a raging tide. The white aura and the golden aura immediately squeezed into a ball. At this time, countless avatars of Masako Tachibana were crowded together, and their specific figures could not be distinguished at all. Even their facial features and limbs were blurred, as if they had merged into a huge white mass of air, crazily shrinking and squeezing toward Li Jiandong. Li Jiandong only felt that this extremely powerful force was squeezing him, as if it was going to squeeze him into meat sauce. His real body immediately bound his hands outside, his 2 middle fingers were erected, and his thumbs were crossed. Like a lotus leaf, he pinched out the most powerful mantra Mahamudra, Amitabha Buddha's fundamental seal. The mantra of the Amitabha Buddha's fundamental seal took a long time to recite, but every time Li Jiandong recited a sentence, the golden light surrounded by the white qi became stronger and stronger. The surrounding cultivators only felt that although the golden light was bound by the white qi, it was like a volcano that was continuing to gather energy and would erupt at any time. Its strength was constantly increasing, and the surrounding white qi was also forced to expand in all directions and could no longer shrink. When Li Jiandong finished reciting the last word of the mantra, there was a sudden bang in front of him, as if a huge bomb had exploded. A strong shock wave quickly spread in all directions. The maple tree in the center of the courtyard, which had become withered, was immediately uprooted by this force. In the blink of an eye, it flew into the sky. But when it was still flying in the air, it was quickly caught up by the shock wave of an aftershock. The two shock waves superimposed and instantly tore the maple tree into pieces. The cultivators of all sects around the courtyard mobilized their jinshi one after another and set up a barrier in front of the house in front of them, blocking the terrible aura in front of them. The white chi of Masako Tachibana was also blown to pieces, but when it was scattered in the air, it quickly changed into the appearance of Masako Tachibana's clone. It glared at Li Jiandong ferociously, as if it had not been damaged at all. After Li Jiandong used the Amitabha Buddha's fundamental seal to break Masako Tachibana's attack once again, a white light flashed around his waist, and the Ryoha sword was instantly unsheathed and split into countless Ryoha swords in the air. Li Jiandong's yang spirit suddenly jumped into the air and also turned into countless yang spirit clones. Each of them held a Ryoha sword and fought with the clones of Masako Tachibana. For a time, there was a fight above the royal courtyard. Everyone felt as if a war had broken out in front of them. Countless people were fighting and entangling with each other. After Li Jiandong trapped the opponent's numerous clones with the same move, he pointed his finger, and the Bahuang sword immediately turned into an invincible rotating iron lotus throne, clanging toward Masako Tachibana. At the same time, he also made 3 Mahamudra in a row, fiercely sealing off all the directions and corners that Masako Tachibana could dodge in. For a moment, all the cultivators on the scene stood up in shock. They had never expected that apart from taking the lead at the beginning, Masako Tachibana had been suppressed by Li Jiandong all the time. At the moment, she was even at a disadvantage. This Chinese cultivator's fighting strength was not only superb, but also fierce and violent. One move after another, it was like a thunderbolt, like layers upon layers of mountains, making people have no time to breathe at all. Even the onlookers felt suffocated, let alone Masako Tachibana, who was on the field, felt it. The middle-aged man of Ise Shinto looked at the field with his mouth agape. He couldn't help but say, how is this possible? Who on earth is this Chinese? Chuyun suddenly straightened his back, and his eyes flashed with a strange light. He stared at Li Jiandong's figure closely and said with a slightly excited expression, "He is much stronger than we imagined." Outside the royal courtyard, there was also a group of stunned spectators. Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin were watching the battle with the help of the sky-reaching glass mirror. At first, when they saw the battle between the two Jinshin, they were so nervous that they didn't even dare to breathe. When Li Jiandong gained the upper hand, they couldn't help but show joy on their faces. Su Chan couldn't help but say happily, "Well, we're going to win." Zhou Qin clenched her fists and said nervously, "Master, hurry up and defeat her." However, there was a hint of worry between Zi Yuan's eyebrows. She murmured to herself, "Something's wrong." Su Chan asked in confusion, "Sister Zi Yuan, what's wrong?" Zi Yuan hesitated for a moment and said, "Although Li Jiandong seems to have been attacking fiercely, I always feel that he doesn't seem to have any effect." Zhou Qin was shocked. Master can't really be merciful, can he? No. This is like raising a tiger to cause trouble." Su Chan's eyes widened. What is Yundong thinking? Why should we be polite to this Japanese devil? Hurry up and defeat her. Zi Yuan thought for a while and said, "No, Li Jiandong seems to have used all his strength, but Masako Tachibana doesn't seem to have used all her strength. Look, although she is being suppressed by Li Jiandong at this time, she is not in a mess at all, as if she is looking for the bottom line of Li Jiandong's real strength." Not long after Zi Yuan's voice fell, she saw Li Jiandong attack like a storm. Masako Tachibana suddenly stopped. Her eyebrows were raised, her eyes were murderous, and she said with a ferocious face, "Have you had enough? If that's all you have, today will be your end." After that, countless clones around her gathered together to form a huge cloud statue. Then, countless bodhisattvas and Buddhas on Mount Koya began to shake. Beams of golden light soared into the sky, gathered in a constantly rolling cloud in the sky, and then cast on Masako Tachibana together. In an instant, Masako Tachibana's indomitable cloud statue was shining with golden light, and her whole body seemed to be surrounded by flames. She held a huge golden long sword in her hand, raised it high, and then slashed down heavily on Li Jiandong's head. Seeing this sword, Zhou Qin couldn't help exclaiming, "Master, hide!" Zi Yuan and Su Chan also cried out at the same time, "Vajra wisdom sword?" He had been in a meeting in the morning. As soon as he finished lunch at 12 o'clock, he immediately wrote a chapter and sent it up. He was tired and sleepy. He went to take a nap first. In the afternoon, he would continue the meeting. Chapter 638. Faith is a kind of power. When the believers of Tibetan Buddhism faced the Buddha Randang, they devoutly lit their little fingers, burned their fingers to worship the Buddha, and burned their little fingers. In this process, they endured the pain that ordinary people could not bear, but their faces were full of happiness. Self-destruction and self-abuse, just to worship the God, this is the power of faith. In the extremely poor families, they were in a precarious situation, and even the next meal was about to starve to death, but the devout believers still respectfully offered the life-saving dry food in front of the Buddha. Even if they starved to death, they still had to worship the Buddha. Sacrifice life and death, just to worship the Buddha, this is the power of faith. For thousands of years, the gods and Buddhas of Zhenyan Tantrism had enjoyed such devout faith and worship. The spiritual power condensed by countless believers was wrapped around this divine mountain, which had long formed an incomparably huge and amazing power of gods and Buddhas. This was the source of Masako Tachibana's strength. At this time, she held the Vajra wisdom sword in her hand and chopped down. The long sword was filled with the powerful and terrifying power of faith of Mount Koya for thousands of years. This force almost tore the sky apart, and in an instant, Mount Koya became covered with dark clouds, as if it was hanging over people's heads. The dark sky would fall and collapse at any time. This dark cloud almost covered the whole sky, so that most of the cloud body of Masako Tachibana was covered. The Japanese reporters who had been doing live reports at the gate of the royal courtyard saw the dark clouds rolling over their heads, but this dark cloud was quickly torn apart by a dazzling golden light. Although they didn't know what had happened, they knew that this must be the abnormality caused by the fighting in the courtyard. For a moment, they were stunned and looked at the scene on the field in a daze, unable to say a word. When Zi Yuan and Su Chan saw Masako Tachibana's sword coming down, they were so scared that their hearts were in suspense. When Zhou Qin heard their shouts, he couldn't help but say in surprise, "Vajra wisdom sword? Is this the sword of the immovable wisdom king?" Zi Yuan stared at the glass mirror of heaven with a nervous face. Her fingers unconsciously clenched, and her knuckles were a little white, but she didn't know it. She said, "Masako Tachibana is serious. She has already used the power of faith of Zhenyan Tantrism. This power is the power of the immovable wisdom king, the main god worshipped by Mount Koya." Zhou Qin couldn't help but ask, "But isn't Master the reincarnation of the immovable wisdom king?" This question stunned both Su Chan and Zi Yuan. They raised their heads at the same time, one with a face full of surprise, the other with a thoughtful look. Su Chan laughed with ecstasy. "Yes, how could I forget about this? It's okay if Masako Tachibana doesn't use the power of the immovable wisdom king, but she uses the power of faith of the immovable wisdom king to deal with the reincarnated wisdom king. Isn't this asking for trouble? This is going to be a good show." The more the little girl spoke, the more excited she became. The worry between her eyebrows was swept away, and her two glasses narrowed into a line as she smiled, her face full of pride. Although Zi Yuan's eyebrows were also full of unconcealable joy, she still said cautiously, "Don't be careless. Let's see what happens first." When the cultivators of various sects who were watching the battle saw the Vajra wisdom sword with their own eyes, their faces immediately became serious and their expressions hid fear. Many of them were defeated by Masako Tachibana's Vajra wisdom sword. But Masako Tachibana's sword smashed toward Li Yundong. Although there was a loud bang, the tip of the sword stopped 3 inches away from the top of Li Yundong's head, so it could not fall any more. Masako Tachibana was stunned, but then she became furious. She raised the huge sword in her hand again and chopped it down hard. The power of this sword was even greater than before. The long sword almost cut through the air. When the edge of the cloud sword rubbed against the air, it made a thunderous roar, which was so terrifying that it was suffocating. But this sword still fell 3 inches above Li Yundong's head again, and it could no longer move forward. No matter how angry Masako Tachibana was, the bat in front of Li Yundong seemed to have an invisible wall, forcibly blocking the terrible Vajra wisdom sword in front of him. Masako Tachibana was shocked and angry. This is impossible. The immovable Wisdom King's intellectual sword could sever everything in the world. Even if it was a flowing river, with a single slash, the river would flow backwards, the raging waves would freeze. Even if it was the world's most unresolvable and chaotic strands of emotion, with a single slash of the intellectual sword, it could completely sever all love and hatred. Masako Tachibana had been in Japan for more than 10 years. There had never been anything that she could not cut off under the wisdom sword. How could she not even cut off the head of this young boy? Masako Tachibana was so angry that she shouted. In an instant, all the immovable Wisdom King dojo, statues, stone statues, Buddhist shrines, and even the lantern lampstands with the image of the immovable Wisdom King in the whole Mount Koya began to jump as if they were alive. Streams of white light gathered toward Masako Tachibana. Masako Tachibana's cloud body gradually condensed and turned into a raging Vajra surrounded by flames. This Vajra stared at everything in front of him. As the incarnation of Buddha's anger, as soon as he appeared in the world, he made people feel a terrifying aura of anger coming on their faces. The blue flame burning behind the immovable Wisdom King was like a sea of hell fire, vowing to burn everything in the world. There was a sea of blue fire boiling in the sky. In the eyes of the world, half of the sky on Mount Koya had turned a strange dark blue, and the surrounding air had become scorching hot. The leaves on Mount Koya withered quickly, as if they were being burned by the terrible high temperature and were losing water rapidly. This blue flame quickly spread in all directions, and soon the whole sky turned into a blue sea of fire. Only the immovable Wisdom King stood in this sea of fire, his whole body was dark green. The Wisdom King showed ferocious teeth on both sides of his mouth, and his face was twisted with anger. He was bare-armed, his coat was tilted, and he was wearing a skirt. In his hand, he was holding the Vajra wisdom sword that Masako Tachibana had held before. He was raising the wisdom sword in his hand bit by bit, as if he would swing the sword down in the next second and completely destroy the world. In the royal courtyard, some of the cultivators with poor willpower had already stood up in fear. They wished they could run away as far as possible. Some of the cultivators who had been defeated in the hands of Masako Tachibana turned pale, and their eyes showed fear that they could not bear to look back. The middle-aged man of Ise Shinto looked at the immovable Wisdom King summoned by Masako Tachibana in horror. He said in a hoarse voice, "Immovable Wisdom King, the king of all wisdom kings, the head of all wisdom kings. I haven't seen him for a long time." Chuyun, who had been expressionless all the time, also looked at the immovable Wisdom King, whose power was enough to destroy the world, in horror. She said in a low voice, "Is this the power of the immovable Wisdom King? It's really powerful, really powerful. No wonder you told me since I was a child that Masako Tachibana was invincible in Mount Koya. It turns out that it's true." At this time, Masako Tachibana took out the immovable Wisdom King, and the rolling dark clouds in the sky were also burned away by the blue flames of the immovable Wisdom King. The people of Mount Koya looked up at the angry Wisdom King in the sky with their mouths agape. They didn't move at all, as if they had been scared out of their wits. Especially when the wisdom sword in the immovable Wisdom King's hand was raised to the highest point above his head, time seemed to stop moving, and the air became frozen. Then, the Vajra wisdom sword in the immovable Wisdom King's hand suddenly chopped down. There was no need for any fancy tricks, no need for any magical treasures. Akalanatha was the embodiment of Buddha's wrath. His power had already surpassed everything. He no longer needed these fancy things to display his unparalleled power. This ordinary sword chopped down, but it had already surpassed all the previous dangerous fighting methods. When the people of Mount Koya saw the sword chopping down, an idea suddenly jumped out of their minds. It's over, this world is going to be destroyed by Buddha. No one knew who was the first to let out a heart-wrenching cry. All of a sudden, almost all the people in the world screamed and ran away crazily, like small animals fleeing in all directions before the disaster came. At this time, Masako Tachibana had completely lost her mind. For the sake of the victory in front of her, she had forgotten everything. In her mind, there was only one thought: I can't lose, immovable Wisdom King. Help me destroy the guy in front of me who is blocking my way. Masako Tachibana watched the terrifying wisdom sword fall toward Li Yundong. His figure was instantly swallowed up by the huge wisdom sword. At this moment, she was so happy that she raised her head and laughed loudly. This burst of laughter was full of arrogance and unruliness. Coupled with the fact that Li Yundong's position had been instantly swallowed up by a blue flame, it highlighted Masako Tachibana's superior posture and pride as the winner. Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin looked at the scene in the glass mirror of heaven and were stunned. The three of them were speechless for a while. After a long time, Zhou Qin suddenly said angrily, "This is impossible." The little girl was also shocked. For some reason, her tears fell involuntarily. She said blankly, "Impossible, Yundong, he can't be like this." In the end, the two ominous words were on the tip of the little girl's tongue, but she couldn't say them out loud no matter how hard she tried. Zi Yuan didn't say a word. She bit her lips tightly with her snow-white teeth, and her whole body was trembling. The fairy, who was usually very calm, seemed to have her spine taken away in an instant. Her whole body became light and she couldn't even stand still. Although some cultivators of various sects in the Japanese cultivation world were very sympathetic and appreciative of Li Yundong, this battle involved the cultivation world of China and Japan. In any case, the Japanese cultivation world could not afford to lose. Therefore, the moment they saw Li Yundong being swallowed up by the flames, many people couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Some sects that were very close to Zhenyan Tantrism even cheered. The three monks who had been guarding the gate of the royal courtyard also noticed the outcome from the changes in the sky and the aura in the courtyard. They couldn't help cheering. The Japanese reporters, who had always disliked Li Yundong's high-profile behavior, saw them cheering and also clapped their hands to celebrate. But just as these Japanese people were celebrating, a soft sneer suddenly came from the boiling blue flame. Although this voice was soft, it was clearly heard by everyone in the fighting field of the royal courtyard. They only heard the voice say in a sarcastic tone, "You Japanese like to read the romance of the Three Kingdoms very much, but haven't you read the water margin?" As he spoke, a man slowly walked out from within the blue flames. He had an imposing appearance and was completely unharmed. It was Li Yundong. Chapter 639. The blue flame burning around the immovable Wisdom King was the manifestation of the angry power of Buddha. This power was extremely terrible, enough to be compared with the Samadhi true fire of Taoism, which could burn everything. When Masako Tachibana saw the blue flame devouring Li Yundong, she couldn't help laughing wildly. This difficult and hateful opponent finally disappeared in front of her. But what Masako Tachibana never expected was that in less than half a minute, Li Yundong walked out of the terrible flame unscathed. Not only was he unscathed, but the handmade silk tang suit on his body did not even show any sign of being burned, as if the flame was just the decorative background around him. Masako Tachibana was stunned by the scene in front of her. Her mind buzzed and she shouted in a hoarse voice, "This is impossible. This is absolutely impossible. Who the hell are you?" Li Jiandong did not answer Masako Tachibana. He just looked coldly at the patriarch of the Tachibana family in front of him. His eyes were full of mockery, as if the real master had seen a fake swindling outside in his name. Li Yundong raised one hand and waved it. The blue flame around him quickly rushed into his palm like rivers returning to the sea. The blue flame boiling in the sky and the flame around him quickly gathered in his palm and rotated quickly. Every time it rotated, it was compressed. Soon the sky was as clear as before, and all the blue flame was compressed into a fist-sized blue fireball by Li Yundong. The density and strength of this fireball were incredibly high. It looked like a burning blue glass ball, and the ripples of the flame could be clearly seen flowing and boiling inside. Although it was already very shocking to be able to control the flame all over the sky freely, what did it mean to be able to compress the flame of Wisdom King into such a small ball? But for this point, very few people on the scene thought about it for a while. They had a more serious and terrifying problem to worry about. The cultivators of all the sects in Japan looked at the blue flame in Li Yundong's palm with fear in their eyes. They knew that the flames seemed to have become smaller, but its power was far more terrifying than the sea of fire that had filled the sky just now. Originally, flames would only burn and scorch everything it came into contact with, but this fireball was compressed from a sea of fire that filled the sky, and it had a terrifying explosive power. It could even be said that this blue fireball was equivalent to the power of 10 atomic bombs. If it was detonated by Li Yunyang, Mount Koya would be razed to the ground, and a huge sinkhole would appear in Wakayama Prefecture, Japan. Based on the special geographical structure of the island country of Japan, once this blue fireball exploded, not only would Wakayama Prefecture be finished, but the continental shelf of Japan would also be shaken to the point of ushering in an even more terrifying earthquake and tsunami. This would be the end of the Japanese nation. All the cultivators of all the sects in Japan stared at the blue fireball in Li Yundong's hand nervously. They didn't even dare to breathe. Even the middle-aged man of Ise Shinto and Chuyun, who had admired Li Yundong before, stood up nervously at this time. They were surrounded by Jinshi and took out their powerful magical weapons. Their eyes seemed to be about to shoot out sharp blades as they stared at Li Yundong. As long as he had the slightest intention of detonating the blue fireball, they would attack at all costs. They were powerful cultivators and could escape from such a terrifying explosion by all kinds of means, but His Majesty the Mikado and his wife could not. There were countless ordinary people in Japan here. They could not. At this time, even the most arrogant Japanese cultivators did not dare to scold Li Yundong. They glared at Li Yundong and wanted to kill him in an instant, but they did not dare to speak at all. They were afraid that they would provoke this guy and detonate the fireball. Then Japan would disappear from this world. For a moment, the scene was extremely quiet. The cultivators of all the sects in Japan were sweating profusely and motionless like stone sculptures. Fortunately, Li Yundong did not intend to destroy Japan. The blue fireball in his hand became smaller and smaller, and finally, it slowly became so small that it could not be seen. Then, with a buzzing sound, a blue ripple burst out in the air and continued to spread in all directions. It was like a blue light wave spectrum, which was very beautiful. Li Yundong also knew that it would not do him any good to detonate this blue fireball. This fireball was enough to kill millions of secular people. Although he did not like Japan and hated its wolf-like nature, what had these people done? To say the least, if a cultivator killed an ordinary secular person, he would provoke a terrible divine tribulation. What about killing 1 million secular people? What kind of terrible tribulation would befall him? Not to mention that he was the reincarnation of Wisdom King. Even if the real Buddha appeared, he would be taken away by God, wouldn't he? Moreover, among the cultivators of all sects on the scene, there were definitely many top experts. Many of their real cultivation was far above that of Masako Tachibana. However, Masako Tachibana could use the powerful power of faith, so she could defeat them. It was easy for these people to escape the range of the flame bomb. If he destroyed Japan, wouldn't they go back to take revenge? This kind of result was not what Li Yundong wanted to see. If it really happened, it would be a terrible war in the cultivation world of China and Japan, and it would even directly lead to the complete destruction of the cultivation world of China and Japan. After Li Yundong made the blue fireball in his hand disappear, the cultivators of all sects around him let out a long sigh of relief. A gust of wind blew, and some people felt that they were all wet, as if they had just been fished out of the water. The middle-aged man of Ise Shinto couldn't help wiping the sweat on his forehead. He said with a look of relief and fear, it was so dangerous, so dangerous. Chuyun also slightly loosened his clenched fists and secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, he is not a lunatic. However, Masako Tachibana didn't seem to feel the danger just now. She still looked at Li Yundong in disbelief and shouted as if she had lost her mind, "Who the hell are you?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and raised his other hand. At this time, the blue-black immovable wisdom king in the sky instantly turned into countless tiny white lights and instantly broke down. One by one, thousands of strands flowed into Li Yundong's body. As soon as this force entered Li Yundong's body, his whole body burst out with a dazzling white light. A crack appeared between his eyebrows with a tearing sound. The crack slowly elongated, and a majestic and cold vertical pupil appeared. Then, Li Yundong's bones cracked, and 2 heads and 4 arms quickly grew out from his shoulders and back. He became an angry wisdom king with 3 heads and 6 arms, who was more than 2 meters tall. At this moment, even Su Chan, Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, and the others, who had seen this scene through the glass mirror of heaven, could not tell whether Li Yundong's physical body had directly transformed into the Dharmakaya of Wisdom King, or whether his yang spirit body had transformed into such a way to shroud his physical body. When everyone saw Li Yundong's appearance at this time, they were so shocked that they shouted, "This is Wisdom King Tianzuan. Immovable Wisdom King. This is impossible." Masako Tachibana's head was buzzing. She suddenly remembered what her daughter had said to her very seriously, "Mom, this Li Yundong is the reincarnation of Wisdom King. You must not use the power of immovable Wisdom King to fight with him." At that time, Masako Tachibana scoffed at this statement and didn't believe it at all. It was like a person squandering an ownerless treasure for more than 10 years. He had subconsciously regarded this treasure as his own exclusive property. Suddenly, one day, someone came to her and told her that this treasure belonged to another person. How could she believe it? Even if she believed it, how could she be willing to admit it? Masako Tachibana was sweating all over, and beads of sweat rolled down her forehead. She subconsciously murmured, "Impossible, this is absolutely impossible." But her body was trembling under the pressure of Akalanatha, trembling, her feet retreated step by step, as if she wanted to escape from this terrible place. At this time, Masako Tachibana regretted it to the extreme. If she didn't use the power of immovable Wisdom King, she might not be able to defeat Li Yundong. But she was too eager for quick success and instant benefits. She wanted to defeat her opponent in one fell swoop and deter the hostile sects that were eyeing her covetously and ambitious. That was why she mobilized the power of immovable Wisdom King. The power of the immovable Wisdom King was stored in the various statues and shrines of Mount Koya in the form of a seal. Without the call of Masako Tachibana's special bloodline power, they would never wake up and would never be used by outsiders. Even if Li Yundong was the reincarnation of immovable Wisdom King, it was impossible for him to mobilize this power in Mount Koya. It was better not to use this power. Once he used it, it was equivalent to giving the other party a big gift. Li Yundong's strength had increased exponentially, and the power of his Fazhen had increased to a level that no one dared to look directly at. Li Yundong slowly raised the Vajra sword in his hand. Although this sword was much smaller than the huge sword held by Masako Tachibana before, the condensed sharpness was like a substance, and its power was greater. When the sword in Li Yundong's hand was raised to the highest point, he suddenly shouted and slashed at Masako Tachibana. At this moment, Masako Tachibana only felt that the sky above her head suddenly darkened, and an extremely terrible force pounced on her. She couldn't move at all, not even a little finger. The only thing she could do was to watch as the sword slashed down on her head, and then let out a heart-wrenching scream. Just as the sword in Li Yundong's hand was about to fall on Masako Tachibana's head, a figure suddenly rushed out of the field and shouted, "Don't kill her." Li Yundong took a closer look and saw that Tachibana Wakako's thin body was standing in front of her mother. Her body was trembling slightly, and her trembling legs betrayed her heart full of fear. However, she bit her lips tightly, and there was a firm light in her eyes. The long sword in Li Yundong's hand stopped at the top of Tachibana Wakako's head in an instant. He said in a cold voice, "Give me a reason not to kill her." Tachibana Wakako's young and immature face was full of stubbornness. Her voice trembled slightly, but she still said loudly and forcefully, "Heaven has the virtue of cherishing life. Who doesn't make mistakes all his life?" Almost all the cultivators present were moved by this sentence. Even Kaisai Hikaryuni couldn't help but sigh. Amitba. As for whether he was sighing at the failure of Jinyin Tantrism or the wisdom of Tachibana Wakako, no one knew. Li Yundong was silent for a long time. The long sword in his hand slowly disappeared, and his figure slowly changed back to the original appearance of the man in the tang suit. He suddenly smiled and said to Masako Tachibana, "Your daughter understands more than you do. You've lived for more than 10 years in vain." When Masako Tachibana heard Li Yundong's words, his voice kept echoing in her mind. There was a blank and indignant voice in her heart that kept shouting, "Is it wrong for me to work hard for more than 10 years? What was wrong with me? What was wrong with me?" Masako Tachibana thought of what she had boasted in front of everyone, of the plan she had carefully arranged before, and of the miserable situation in front of everyone now. She couldn't help feeling ashamed and angry at the same time. A stream of hot air rushed up from her dantian. She was so angry that her chi and blood were in a mess. She spat out a mouthful of blood and fell down on her back. Tachibana Wakako let out a cry of surprise. She turned around and hugged Masako Tachibana, who had collapsed on the ground. The middle-aged man of Ise Shinto looked at Masako Tachibana and shook his head. The era of Masako Tachibana is over. The Japanese cultivation world will usher in the era of hegemony again. Chuyun looked at Li Yundong with a complicated look in her eyes. It was hard to tell whether it was admiration or fear. She asked in a low voice, "What about him?" The middle-aged man looked at Li Yundong, only to see that Li Yundong did not look at Masako Tachibana and the others. He turned around, dusted off the dust on his body and was about to leave. He couldn't help but whisper, "This Chinese man defeated Masako Tachibana. If this gets out." Previously, he had thought that Li Yundong was a weak hero, so he had a pity for him. But at this time, the other party had defeated Masako Tachibana. The nature of the whole thing had changed. Not only did he think of this idea, but the cultivators of other Japanese cultivation sects also thought of it. Behind Li Yundong, a few loud shouts rang out at the same time, "You can't go. Chinaman, stop right there. Do you want to leave after hurting someone?" When Li Yundong heard the voice, he turned around. His expression did not change at all, but his eyes were full of contempt and disdain. At this time, Ziyuan, who was hiding in the woods outside the royal courtyard of Mount Koya, raised her head. She quickly wiped the Tongtian glass mirror with her hand and hid the powerful magical weapon on her body. She said, "It's time for us to play." At this time, in Kyoto, Japan, a demon-sealing war was taking place in the downtown area. Sorry, I was too tired at noon, so I didn't have time to update. I'll try to update a chapter in the evening. The next chapter is the appearance of the black fox. Chapter 640. In the Qingming Shrine in the Shangjing district of Kyoto, Japan, Lu Yi was standing in front of an inconspicuous stone platform. He reached out and stroked the bright red 5-pointed star rune on the stone platform. Just as he gently stroked it for a while, he heard an old voice behind him saying in Japanese, "I'm sorry, you can't touch this thing with your hands like this." Lu Yi didn't look back. He said in Japanese with a strong Kanto accent, "Is that so? Are you afraid that I will release the monster sealed in this stone?" With that, Lu Yi turned around and smiled slightly. The smile on his face was so kind that it was almost harmless. Standing in front of Lu Yi was a short old man. He was about 1.6 meters tall and was wearing the most ordinary brown Japanese men's kimono. The old man's eyebrows were white and long, and the skin on his face was so old that it was like a crisscrossed ravine. He looked like he was more than 100 years old. He was slightly hunched, leaning on a cane, with one hand behind his back. He also looked at Lu Yi with a smile on his face. After the old man took a serious look at Lu Yi, he laughed and said, "You're from Kanto, aren't you? From your accent, it seems that you're from there. This stone doesn't have any monsters sealed in it. You might have heard some strange stories from somewhere, right?" Lu Yi laughed and said, "Really? But why did I hear that Tamamo no Me was sealed here?" A sharp light flashed through the old man's dim yellow eyes, but it was only for a moment. He quickly smiled and said, "You're wrong. Tamamo no Me was sealed in the Stone of Slaughter. Moreover, as early as the Muromachi era, monk Xian Wang used heavenly thunder to split the stone into two pieces. Although the Stone of Slaughter was still there, Tamamo no Me's soul had long been destroyed by monk Xian Wang. Huh, even the children know this story." Lu Yi also laughed with the old man. He said with a smile, "Really? But I didn't find any traces of lightning on the Stone of Slaughter when I was in Nasu Town, Azuki Prefecture, Kanto." The old man laughed and said, "Nearly 1,000 years have passed. How can we still find these traces?" Lu Yi shook his head and said with a smile, "That's not necessarily true. If you want to destroy the soul of the mystical silver fox, it's useless to use ordinary heavenly thunder. Only the most powerful nine-heaven god night thunder can destroy her soul. Once the nine heavens' heavenly night thunder falls, let alone a stone, even the mountains, rivers, and seas will be turned into ashes. How can there still be a Stone of Slaughter?" The old man's eyes narrowed slightly. The smile on his face didn't change, but his voice slowly turned cold. He said word by word, "Who are you?" Lu Yi sighed softly. Instead, he turned sideways and reached out to gently stroke the five-pointed star rune on the stone platform. He sighed in a low voice, "I also thought that the soul of the mystical silver fox was locked in the killing stone, so I secretly visited it in Guangdong for a long time. But I found that the killing stone was just an ordinary stone, but there was always a faint aura of the fox demon near this stone. So I understood at that time that the mystical silver fox was indeed sealed there, but because the mystical silver fox still had powerful demonic power when she was sealed, any creature that approached her would be sucked out of her life to restore her spiritual energy." Lu Yi continued with a smile, "Because of this, the Japanese cultivation world knows that they can no longer ignore the killing stone like this. If they don't do this, sooner or later, the mystical silver fox will absorb enough life and recover its strength to break out of the stone. Therefore, you came up with a way to replace the dead. You asked monk Xian Wang to come forward and split a stone without the soul of the mystical silver fox with heavenly thunder. Then, you replaced the stone that was split with the stone that sealed the mystical silver fox with heavenly thunder. That is the stone in front of me." As he said this, Lu Yi turned his head to look at the old man behind him. "Am I right? Lord Su Qian of the Earth Imperial Sect? Or should I call you Lord Su Qian of Abe?" Su Qian's face was extremely serious. He stared at Lu Yi like lightning and said slowly, "Which sect are you from? Why did you come here to say such a thing? Since you know this, you should know that this stone is an ominous thing. You should leave." Lu Yi chuckled and said, "Is it really an ominous thing?" Su Qian saw that Lu Yi spoke in an authentic Kanto accent, and his manner and words were no different from those of the Japanese. The Kanto sect in the Japanese cultivation world was a very famous force. In the battle to encircle and suppress the mystical silver fox, the Kanto sect was the cultivator who rushed to the front. Although Lu Ye's words were a little strange, and he even knew the real origin of Tamamo no Me, it could be seen that he should be a cultivator with a very strong background. Therefore, Su Qian had the preconceived idea that Lu Yi was a cultivator from the Kanto area of Japan. Everyone in Japan knew about Tamamo no Me, and Tamamo no Me was a well-known name in the Japanese cultivation world. However, very few cultivators knew that Tamamo no Me was the mystical silver fox. Only the Japanese cultivation sects that had participated in the encirclement and suppression knew about this extremely secret matter. In the era of the Emperor of Tobarama, the mystical silver fox had hidden beside the emperor in the name of Tamamo no Mae. Later, she had been discovered by Yasuhiro Abe. In a rage, the emperor of Tobarama had sent his favorite generals, Miura Jia Yoshiaki, Ueda Tsukirosho, and the strongest onmyoji in Japan at that time. Yasuhiro Abe had organized 80,000 troops to encircle and suppress the mystical silver fox. This battle had been recorded in the history of Japan. It was unprecedented and unprecedented. Even in a large-scale battle in Japan, there were very few battles with close to 100,000 people. However, these 80,000 elite soldiers had been used to encircle and suppress a mystical silver fox with only one soul and two spirits left. It could be said that in the history of Japan, no demon had ever been able to enjoy such treatment. It was also because of this battle that Tamamo no Mae's great reputation shook the Japanese court and was spread to the world. Since then, the name of the mystical silver fox had been changed in the cultivation world of Japan. In Abe Su Qian's opinion, since Liu Yi knew about it and spoke Japanese so fluently, he must be the descendant of a big cultivation family in Japan. After learning about the whereabouts of the mystical silver fox, he came to see what was going on out of curiosity. It was not the first time that this kind of thing had happened. However, Abe Su Qian didn't know that Liu Yi was the junior of the mystical silver fox, and he was also a terrifying eight-tailed fox. After Liu Yi had cultivated to the eight-tailed fox, his demon qi had been completely restrained. He was no different from ordinary people. Therefore, even Abe Su Qian, who had a high cultivation, couldn't see Liu Ye's true identity. Abe Su Qian said with a serious face, "Why isn't it an ominous thing? When the mystical silver fox was sealed in this stone, any creature that approached her would be sucked to death by her." Later, several generations of our Abe family sacrificed their lives to make this magic sealing rune, which completely sealed her in this place. Our Abe family has been guarding this place for more than 30 generations. I advise you to stay away from it. Liu Yi looked at the stone in front of him with pity and sympathy. The jinqi in his body began to flow quietly. He pressed his finger on the 5-pointed star rune and suddenly said in surprise, "Ah, there is a crack here." Abe Su Qian was stunned and couldn't help scolding, "Nonsense. This rune has an extremely strong demon sealing power. How could there be a crack?" However, Liu Yi said, "You don't believe me? Then come and see for yourself." After that, he stepped aside. Abe Su Qian took a closer look at Liu Yi and took a few steps forward doubtfully. He took a closer look and saw that the stone platform was undamaged. There was no crack. Abe Su Qian was stunned, and soon he felt a strong wind coming from behind him. The pores on his back suddenly exploded, and a creepy feeling came quickly. Abe Su Qian subconsciously dodged to the side, but he didn't expect that he would dodge this attack. Soon, the other party followed him like a shadow. Abe Su Qian saw a vast expanse of white in front of him. A huge white object swept toward him, and his body was immediately swept away. As an old man of the Abe family, Abe Su Qian was not a onmyoji who was very good at fighting. 2 of the strongest people of the Abe family were in Tokyo, and the other 2 were in Mount Koya. Abe Su Qian was the weakest one who stayed behind. Although he knew the importance of this stone platform, no matter how important it was, after guarding it for nearly 1,000 years, his vigilance would always drop. Besides, who dared to be presumptuous near Mount Hiroi? Who dared to be presumptuous in the Qingming Divine Club? The Abe family, who had guarded this sealing stone for nearly 1,000 years, did not expect that someone would take advantage of this time. In addition, Liu Yi had carefully prepared and imitated the accent and behavior of the Kanto people vividly, which made Abe Su Qian have a preconceived idea. This time, Liu Yi suddenly launched a sneak attack. How could he not succeed? Abe Su Qian's body was smashed out fiercely. His thin and weak body slammed into a traditional restaurant. His body was like a cannonball, and the curtain at the door fluttered. There was a burst of clanging and shouting in the room. But soon, Abe Su Qian rushed back from inside in an instant, surrounded by a black aura. Blood spilled from the corner of his mouth. He stared at Lu Yi in front of him angrily and shouted, "Who the hell are you?" A deep laugh came from Lu Ye's throat. As he chuckled, huge snow-white tails grew out of his back one after another. The fur of these white tails was smooth, reflecting a strange and enchanting beauty in the light. Abe Su Qian's pupils shrank sharply. Nine-tailed fox spirit. The nine-tailed fox spirit was so famous in the Japanese cultivation world that when Abe Su Qian saw the foxtail behind Lu Yi, the first thought that came to his mind was this. But he soon found that there were only 8 tails behind this fox spirit. Fortunately, it's not a 9-tailed fox spirit. Abe Su Qian was a little relieved. He quickly looked around, only to see that the tourists near the Qingming Shrine, as well as the owners and employees of the traditional restaurant, were all shocked by the scene in front of them. They stood there in a daze, as if they were scared silly. They couldn't come to their senses for a long time. Abe Su Qian shouted, "Run! What are you waiting for?" As soon as he finished speaking, the tail behind Lu Yi swept fiercely. Once again, Abe Su Qian, who was distracted, was swept away. This time, his body hit the wall heavily, making a big hole in the wall. Lu Yi glanced at Abe Su Qian with disdain and snorted coldly, "Watch this moment." As he said this, he turned around, turned his hand, and slapped the stone platform in front of him, which was deeply engraved with red 5-pointed star runes. "Stop!" Just as Lu Ye's palm was about to fall, Abe Su Qian endured the sharp pain, propped up his body in the ruins, and quickly threw a 5-pointed star rune at Lu Yi. The 5-pointed star rune quickly turned into a ferocious shiki in the air. It had a single horn on its head and fangs in its mouth. It pounced on Lu Yi with a ferocious face. Lu Yi turned around and glanced at the shikigami. His gaze was condescending and full of sarcasm and mockery. "You want to stop me with just this?" After saying that, white fox fur quickly grew out of his body, and he instantly revealed his true form. Lu Ye's true body was more than 3 meters tall. He glared at the shikigami in front of him like a giant beast. He opened his mouth and let out a ferocious roar. With a howl of rage, the shikigami was shattered into pieces by the impact of the sound waves alone. Even Abe and Su Qian were sent flying again. At this time, no one could stop Lu Yi anymore. He turned around and stepped heavily on the stone platform. With a loud bang, a crack appeared on the stone platform. With a crack, a faint golden aura quickly leaked out of the 5-pointed star rune. Soon, this golden aura surged out and gradually turned into a huge, irregular, mist-like gas floating in the air. Thousands of soldiers were shouting and rushing toward the top of the mountain like a tide. Wearing the armor of a Japanese general, Miura Jia Yoshiaki and Ueda Jia Hiroshi were calmly commanding the army from the rear. Countless Japanese cultivators rushed toward a delicate figure one after another. The famous Onmyoji of Japan, Abe Yasukin, was quickly chanting an incantation and drawing 5-pointed star runes. These pictures flashed quickly like a lantern until they finally froze into a picture. In this image, a woman radiating golden light stood in the middle of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. This woman's back was facing the image, and behind her were 9 extremely long golden fox tails. Each fox tail was soaked in a sea of blood. Countless Japanese samurai, who had already died, were holding samurai swords full of runes and stabbing into her fox tails, forcibly nailing her to the ground. This woman had been hit by countless sharp arrows, and her body was entangled by the dense dead Japanese warriors. Facing the tide-like enemies and the masters of the Japanese cultivation world, she still let out an unyielding and earth-shattering roar. "I'm the mystical silver fox. Who can stop me?" With a loud bang, the picture was shattered in an instant, and the golden powder scattered. Only a clear shout echoed in the sky above Jingdu, Japan, "I'm the mystical silver fox. Who can stop me?" At this moment, many Japanese in Jingdu heard this voice, but this voice was in Chinese. Naturally, they couldn't understand it. Even if there were people who could understand Chinese, they were also like the pedestrians around them. They raised their heads in a daze and looked at the sky, not knowing what had happened. Abe Suqian couldn't help trembling all over. With a face full of fear and despair, he said in a trembling voice, "God. The mystical silver fox has been reborn." Chapter 641. The voice of the mystical silver fox shook the sky, and the whole capital was surprised. Many citizens looked up at the sky. The passers-by stopped walking, and the drivers rear-ended one after another. The busy crossroads were blocked for a while. Abe Suqian trembled all over as he looked at the countless shattered golden particles falling to the ground in the sky. They slowly piled up, and then a person slowly stood up from them. This person's body was blurry, like countless tiny golden light spots combined together. Her entire body seemed a little distorted, but one could vaguely make out that this was a graceful woman. Her appearance was a little blurry, and at first, she did not even have facial features. However, as the golden halo twisted, her features became clearer bit by bit, and slowly, a nose and eyes appeared. Just as her appearance was about to take shape, Abe Suqian suddenly let out a desperate scream. His whole body burst out with dazzling black and white light. With a roar of anger, his body turned into a cannonball and rushed toward the mystical silver fox. After Lu Yi released the mystical silver fox, he slowly returned to his human form. He saw Abe Suqian rushing over, but he didn't stop him at all. Instead, there was a hint of mockery at the corner of his mouth. At this time, Abe Suqian was burning his life and rushing toward the mystical silver fox with the purest power of the true method, trying to destroy her when she showed her figure. But as soon as he rushed in front of her, the mystical silver fox suddenly stretched out her hand, and her palm stopped in front of Abe Suqian. Abe Suqian's cannonball momentum suddenly stopped, and the black and white chi around his body also froze in an instant. Lu Yi sneered and said, "Stupid guy." Just as Lu Yi was about to give Abe Suqian a bet, the mystical silver fox suddenly pinched her fingers and clenched her hands into fists. In an instant, the black and white chi around Abe Suqian's body exploded in all directions with a buzz. When the ghost chi from the yin and yang realms met the nine-tailed celestial fox, it was like a ferocious beast meeting a more ferocious monster. It subconsciously fled in all directions. But when this ghostly aura escaped, it forcibly tore Abe Suqian's already very old body into countless pieces. In an instant, the old man of the yin-yang Dao turned into a cloud of blood mist, causing a burst of frightened exclamations from the surroundings. Some of the ordinary people near the Qingming shrine were so scared that they fled to the distance, some were so scared that they hid behind obstacles and shivered, and some hid in the corner and secretly took pictures of everything in front of them with their mobile phones. At the same time that Abe Suqian was killed in seconds, there was an angry shout on the roof next to Qingming shrine, "Evildoer, kill quickly." When Lu Yi heard the voice, he turned his head and saw two monks standing on the roof with Buddhist beads around their necks and Buddhist staffs in their hands. These two monks were dressed in kasaya, and half of their arms were exposed. Their muscles were so developed that they were like steel bars wrapped around their bodies, like iron towers and vajras. Lu Yi frowned slightly. He knew that these were the guardian vajras of Mount Hai. Their spiritual energy was tyrannical, and they were good at fighting. Everyone's strength was close to the Jinshin phase. He began to worry. The bald donkeys of Mount Hai are really fast. As soon as his voice fell, he saw countless figures jumping down from the roofs of the houses and rushing towards them from the direction of Mount Hai. Lu Ye's heart trembled. He looked at the mystical silver fox anxiously, but he didn't dare to urge the mystical silver fox. He knew that at this time, it was the time for the mystical silver fox's soul to reorganize, her memory to recover, and her strength to awaken again. Once he disturbed her, it would cause great damage to the mystical silver fox. At this moment, the monk on the roof next to him shouted loudly. He waved his Buddhist staff and smashed it towards the top of the mystical silver fox's head like a meteor. The mystical silver fox didn't seem to see it, but just as the Buddhist staff was about to hit her head, she suddenly raised her head and let out a shrill roar. The blue veins on the neck of the mystical silver fox stood out, and her mouth was wide open. A fierce voice that seemed to pierce through the sky and tear the earth burst out from her chest. This shrill roar suddenly shook the surrounding air, and then with a buzz, the air seemed to shrink and quickly surge out of the waves, spreading in all directions. The shock wave shook the ground, and countless cracks spread in all directions from the feet of the mystical silver fox. The glass of the surrounding houses was all shattered in an instant, and many wooden houses even collapsed and fell to the ground. Some ordinary people who were close to her fell to the ground with blood flowing from their 7 orifices without saying a word. It was unknown whether they were dead or alive. As for the 2 powerful monks who bore the brunt of the attack, their bodies seemed to have been frozen in place. After a long time, blood slowly seeped out of the pores of their skin, and their whole bodies slowly turned into a blood man. Their bodies fell to the ground softly. Lu Yi knew that the shrill roar of the mystical silver fox had shaken their qi and blood out of control. They fled in all directions, and finally, their blood vessels burst and they died. Although these 2 monks were not difficult to deal with for Lu Yi, after being sealed for nearly 1,000 years, Lu Yi had always been worried about whether the mystical silver fox would be able to regain its vigor. However, with just a shrill roar, the mystical silver fox had shaken the 2 guardian Vajras to death. Its power was not less than that of the past. I'm the mystical silver fox. Who can stop me? Even if the mystical silver fox only had 1 soul and 2 souls left, even if she had been sealed in the 5-star talisman array for nearly 1,000 years, once she appeared in the world again, her sharpness was still not something that ordinary people could resist. In a trance, Lu Yi seemed to see the majestic figure of the mystical silver fox in the battle with Su Yi. At this moment, Lu Ye's blood was burning all over his body. He had planned for decades and finally succeeded. The Fox Zen school could finally regain its glory. But not long after he was happy, he heard an angry shout that shook the sky. Form a formation to subdue the devil. Lu Yi looked up and saw that the roofs of the surrounding houses were already full of monks. There were no less than 500 or 600 of them. These monks quickly stood on the spot with their palms together, or sat down cross-legged with Buddha beads in their hands. They began to recite scriptures in unison. These chanting sounds shook heaven and earth, revealing an extremely powerful Buddhist power. At once, the mystical silver fox screamed in pain, and her body, which was becoming clearer and clearer, became distorted and blurred again. Among these monks, the leader was a monk dressed in a red cassock. His whole body was shining with amazing golden light. From a distance, he was an old monk in his 70s. Lu Ye's heart trembled, and he said in a low voice, "The sect master of the Tiantai sect, Imagawa Koyun." The Tiantai sect was an extremely powerful force in Japanese Buddhism. Although it was not as good as it was in the Warring States period, and the Tiantai sect in Mount Hai had suffered 3 disasters and fallen from the clouds to the bottom, a centipede was still alive. So far, there were still an astonishing number of martial monks in the Yanli Temple of Mount Hai. When these monks quickly formed the demon-subduing formation, the power of the formation was so powerful that it immediately caused the sky to be covered with dark clouds. The thunderclouds were rolling, and there were signs that the end of the world was coming. Even Lu Yi, such a powerful and abnormal 8-tailed fox, had a sense of fear that he didn't want to take another look. Lu Yi looked at the rolling thunder and lightning above his head. He gritted his teeth and said, "Dharma Hua, exterminating formation." In the battle of Su Yi, who had besieged the mystical silver fox, it was the cultivators of the Tiantai sect who had sacrificed their lives to use this formation to attract the heavenly tribulation, which made the mystical silver fox busy dealing with the heavenly thunder. That was why many Japanese warriors had swarmed up and used the tactic of ants biting a giant elephant to nail her to the spot. The master of the Tiantai sect obviously realized what had happened here at the first time, so he made an amazing decision in an instant. He would activate the Dharma Hua exterminating formation again and seal this terrible demon again. These monks obviously knew that once this formation was activated, most of them here would become sacrifices to launch the heavenly tribulation and die. However, none of these monks retreated timidly. Their faces were full of expressions of facing death calmly, and their voices of chanting the scriptures and incantations did not tremble at all. Soon, the rolling divine thunder in the sky became more and more fierce. The thunder and lightning that fell from all directions were so thick that it made people's hair stand on end. Lu Yi secretly gritted his teeth, quickly took out a talisman from his bosom, and also quickly recited the incantation. Just as he was reciting the incantation, there was a loud bang, and the rolling thunder and lightning around him fell in an instant. It was as if countless divine thunders had gathered together, forming an astonishing torrent of heavenly thunder, rushing towards the mystical silver fox. The figures of the mystical silver fox and Lu Yi were instantly engulfed by the dazzling white light. For a moment, the sky was bright, and they were blind. After a long time, the light around them slowly returned to normal. Imagawa Koyun, the master of the Tiantai sect, spat out a mouthful of blood. Many monks around him also fell to the ground. A monk beside him tilted his body and immediately struggled to rush forward to support him. He gasped and said, "Master Koyun, we succeeded." Imagawa Koyun took a look at the field and saw that the original Qingming shrine had almost disappeared. There was a huge deep pit on the ground, and the houses around the shrine had also become ruins. There was no one in the original place where Lu Yi and the mystical silver fox had been, not even a little ash. Imagawa Koyun frowned. After taking a deep breath, he sighed and said, "No, we failed." The monk next to him was shocked and said, "How could that be? Didn't the heavenly thunder hit her?" Imagawa Koyun said bitterly, "At the moment when the heavenly thunder fell, they ran away." The monk's hair stood on end. Ran away? The mystical silver fox actually ran away? Buddha, such a terrible demon actually escaped in front of us. Who on earth let him go? After all, Imagawa Koyun was the master of the Tiantai sect. He quickly got rid of the depression of the failure of the demon seal. He slowly stood up and said in a cold tone, "Investigate, immediately find out who let the mystical silver fox go. Find out where the mystical silver fox has escaped to. Even if we go to the ends of the earth, we will kill her." The monk next to him whispered, "But Master Koyun, who can take on the responsibility of hunting down the mystical silver fox?" Imagawa Koyun said coldly, "We interrupted the reorganization of the mystical silver fox's soul. Now her soul must have scattered and gone to find her other souls. Therefore, we must find her and kill her before she finds the other souls, otherwise." Imagawa Koyun didn't say the rest of the sentence, but the monk next to him could guess what he was going to say next. Otherwise, once the mystical silver fox recovered all her strength, it would be an unprecedented catastrophe for the Japanese cultivation world. Sorry, I'm too tired today. I went home and slept first. It's even later, but there will be a lot of updates. There will be another update later. In addition, someone asked me if the story would be dominated by Japan in the future. My answer was, how could that be? Japan is just a branch. Of course, the main line is in China. Chapter 642. Just as the mystical silver fox was released, Zi Yuan, Su Chan, and Zhou Qin were about to start their big plan. But as soon as they moved, Su Chan's body suddenly froze in place. She looked in the direction of Jingdu with a blank and surprised face. Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin both stopped and turned to look at her in confusion. Zi Yuan asked carefully, "Su Chan, what's wrong?" "What's wrong?" Su Chan felt her heart skip a beat. There seemed to be a very familiar aura in the distance. This aura might be very strange to ordinary people, but for Su Chan, it was extremely familiar, because it was the unique aura of the fox demon. Where did the fox demon come from? What a strong aura. How could it be so strong? Su Chan looked over and saw that there seemed to be a very faint dark cloud in the distant sky. It was obvious that this powerful fox demon Qi had provoked the heavenly thunder. The little girl looked at the distant sky in surprise and thought to herself, Could it be Master? No, even Master doesn't have such a strong aura. How strong is the fox demon chi to be able to reach me? The little girl stared straight into the distance with her glasses, and her mind was running wild for a while. Suddenly, she didn't know why, but 4 words suddenly popped up in her mind: mystical silver fox. Yes, it must be the mystical silver fox. In the world, only the aura of the mystical silver fox could be so strong. This thought immediately frightened Su Chan. Her face was pale, and she immediately took a few steps back subconsciously. She cried out involuntarily, "No, this is impossible." Although the little girl was sometimes stupid, she was often very smart at the moment of life and death, especially after the Taoist assembly. The little girl naturally knew what it meant to the Fox Zen school if the mystical silver fox was really resurrected. What it meant to Li Yundong? Little by little, little by little. An extremely terrible idea suddenly flashed through Su Chan's mind. She immediately jumped up and said to Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin in horror, "Oh no, let's go. Yundong is in danger." As he spoke, he took the lead and rushed forward. Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin were at a loss and looked at Su Chan suspiciously. Zhou Qin couldn't help chasing after her and asking, "Su Chan, what's wrong with you? What's going on?" Su Chan looked anxious, but she didn't dare to say her guess, so she said, "Don't ask so much now. Hurry up and implement our plan. Let Li Yundong get away as soon as possible. Otherwise, it will be too late." Zhou Qin became more and more confused. She wanted to ask again, but Zi Yuan immediately said firmly, "Don't ask. Listen to Su Chan first. Let's go." Seeing this, Zhou Qin didn't say anything more. She nodded and quickly followed. The 3 of them rushed to the vicinity of the royal courtyard, only to see that the Japanese reporters guarding at the door had already been boiling. After witnessing the strange situation of the previous fight, they thought that Masako Tachibana had won the final victory. They were so excited that they wished they could rush inside and take pictures. For reporters, these monks of Jinyan Tantrism blocked them outside, which was a great torture to their curiosity. Zi Yuan saw at a glance that the 3 monks at the door were also looking curiously in the direction of the courtyard. She lowered her voice and said quickly, "I'm in charge of the one in the middle. Su Chan, you're in charge of the one on the left. Zhou Qin, you're in charge of the one on the right. Do you have any objections?" Zhou Qin and Su Chan nodded at the same time, and Zi Yuan also nodded. She raised her hand and quickly threw a small earth magic behind the Japanese reporters. With a loud bang, the mountains behind these Japanese reporters suddenly shook, which scared them so much that they immediately subconsciously held the machine and lay on the ground. Zi Yuan gritted her teeth and immediately said, "Go." After that, a purple light flashed around her, and the 9th heaven Zi Yuan silk quickly swept out. Her figure also disappeared in an instant. The 9th heaven Zi Yuan silk was like a huge net, which instantly enveloped all the monks in the middle. Although the monk struggled desperately and roared loudly, his voice was trapped in the 9th heaven Zi Yuan silk. His whole body was wrapped like a mummy, and his body fell straight down. The 2 monks next to him were attracted by Zi Yuan's magic. They looked in the direction of the sound with vigilance. The person in the middle was hit and fell backward, but they didn't seem to notice it. At this time, Zhou Qin's whip broke through the air with a swish. The head of the whip was like a poisonous snake spitting out its tongue. It accurately hit the Shanzhong acupoint on the chest of the monk on the right, causing his qi and blood to roll. He couldn't even cry for help, and his body involuntarily bent down. Then, the Vulcan's whip in Zhou Qin's hand quickly wrapped around the monk's body. Zhou Qin shook her wrist and pulled him to her like a prey. She stretched out her hand and quickly poked the monk with her fingers. The monk fainted without saying a word. Although Zhou Qin didn't make the monk make a sound, the sound of Zhou Qin's whip breaking through the air and the sound of pulling people attracted the monks on the left to look at them. As soon as the monk turned his head and saw the scene in front of him, he was about to cry out in alarm. But as soon as he opened his mouth, a beautiful girl appeared in front of him. The girl held a strand of black hair in her hand and touched his neck. He immediately felt his whole body stiffen, and his voice disappeared in his throat. He lost control of his whole body and tilted to the side. At this time, Ziyuan also appeared in front of the fallen monk in the middle at the same time and caught him before he fell to the ground. Ziyuan and Su Chan looked at each other and nodded quickly. The two of them pulled the two monks and quickly went into the jungle. Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, and Su Chan moved as fast as lightning. Before the reporters at the door noticed anything unusual, they had already finished everything. When these reporters stood up in shock, they were surprised to find that the three monks at the door had disappeared. For a moment, these reporters looked at the open and unobstructed door in a daze and looked at each other. They all wanted to rush in immediately, but the discipline and rules of the Japanese people had been deeply rooted in their bones and blood. Although there was no one guarding the door, they still didn't rush in for a while. But at this time, they saw the three ascetics of the Pure Land School they had seen before slowly walking toward the royal courtyard. They watched helplessly as the three monks entered the courtyard, and their minds immediately became active. They looked at each other, and at this time, the curiosity and sense of responsibility of a journalist finally overcame everything. With a shout, they rushed inside like a swarm of bees. Masako Tachibana and Kaisai Hikariuni both knew that although the emperor was also in the courtyard, there were masters from all kinds of sects in the Japanese cultivation world. Naturally, no one could rush to the emperor. Therefore, most of the monks of Jinyin Tantrism were arranged on the periphery of Mount Koya and outside the royal courtyard to prevent outsiders from attacking. The monks in the courtyard were all paying attention to the situation on the field. How could they pay attention to the situation around them? When these reporters rushed into the field like a tide, it was too late for them to stop them. Just as the cultivators of the Japanese cultivation world were attacking Li Yundong, the Japanese reporters rushed in as if they were afraid that the world would be in chaos. For a moment, cameras flew together, and the flashes were the same color. Li Yundong was going to fight with these Japanese cultivators, but when he saw this scene, he was stunned. Just as he was in a daze, a voice came to his ear and said quickly and anxiously, "Li Yundong, go." Li Yundong heard this voice clearly. It was Ziyuan's voice that had been transmitted to him. Why is she here? Li Yundong couldn't help but be stunned. Li Yundong was not a reckless person. He knew that even Guan Yunchang, who went to the meeting alone, had to hold Lu Su hostage to escape in the end, let alone himself. If he didn't take advantage of the chaos to leave now, when would he? In the midst of the chaos, Li Yundong took advantage of the fact that everyone's attention was diverted and disappeared in an instant. In the courtyard, these reporters rushed in. They looked as excited as sharks who had smelled blood. They asked loudly, "Mr. Tayuman, may I ask why you came to Mount Koya this time?" "Master Kaisai Hikariuni, I heard that there was a real battle here." "Is that true?" "Miss Chuyun, what happened in the sky just now? Can you explain it to us?" Although the Japanese cultivators on the scene had seen many storms, they couldn't help but be dumbfounded when they saw this scene. Some cultivators became angry and shouted at the reporters, "Who are you? Who let you in? Drive them out. Shut up. Don't you see that they are filming? Do you want to be filmed?" The monks of Jinyin Tantrism looked at these reporters at a loss. Although they were powerful cultivators, in the face of the satellite live broadcast cameras and these ordinary mortals, they didn't know how to deal with the scene in front of them. Kaisai Hikariuni was extremely unhappy, but he still said to the reporters kindly, "Amitba, please behave yourself. His Majesty the Mikado is upstairs." The Mikado's power was extraordinary. The reporters on the scene immediately quieted down and stood up solemnly, no longer making noise. At this time, a figure also stood up from the half-covered window upstairs. The figure flashed past the window and slowly went downstairs. The faces of the cultivators of all sects on the scene were very ugly. In front of the Mikado, the Japanese cultivation world had been slapped in the face in public. Some of them soon became alert and looked around for traces of Li Yundong. While they were searching around, they heard a loud laugh coming from the air. Li Yundong's figure stood in the clouds and said with a smile, "The waves in the east of the river lead dozens of people to drive this small boat and a leaf. It's not like the 9-layered dragon in Phoenix Tower, but it's a tiger's den. I think this single-blade society is like the Sai Village Society. What a good view of the river." After that, Li Yundong laughed 3 times and disappeared into the sky. The Japanese cultivators were immediately furious. Almost all the Japanese men had read the 3 Kingdoms, and these cultivators were all well-cultivated and knowledgeable masters. Naturally, they knew that Li Yundong was reciting Guanhanqing's single-blade society to satirize them as clowns in Jiangdong. Some cultivators said angrily, "Damn it, let this Chinaman escape. Bastard, ignorant junior, how dare you laugh at us? Damn it, go and get him back." But although they were shouting fiercely, none of them took action. Firstly, there were reporters at the scene, and secondly, the previous battle had really shocked them. This young man was actually the reincarnation of the Wisdom King. This was really too scary. The Japanese worshipped the immovable Wisdom King the most. Just as these cultivators were making a racket, a monk suddenly rushed to Kaisai Hikariuni and whispered a few words in his ear. Kaisai Hikariuni's originally calm and peaceful face suddenly changed dramatically. He said with a horrified and distorted face, "What did you say?" The monk said it again in his ear, and this time, Kaisai Hikariuni's whole body trembled. The surrounding reporters looked at Kaisai Hikariuni curiously. They didn't understand why this great monk, whose expression would not change even if Mount Tai collapsed in front of him, would panic to such an extent. But although they didn't hear what he said, the cultivators of all sects and schools heard such a sentence with their super strength. The mystical silver fox had reappeared in the world. In an instant, all the Japanese cultivators in the royal courtyard of Mount Koya fell silent, and a terrible and solemn atmosphere enveloped the field. Chapter 643. The news of the resurrection of the mystical silver fox made all the cultivators in Japan feel as if they were immersed in an ice cellar, and a chill pierced their bones. Although it had been nearly 1,000 years since the Great War of Sealing Demons in Suyi, the horrible memory of this war was still lingering in the Japanese cultivators' minds. They didn't dare to imagine what kind of disaster would be brought to Japan and the Japanese cultivation world after such a big devil was released. Kaisai Hikariuni was the first to recover from this terrible news. He said to the reporters beside him, who widened their eyes and were full of curiosity, "Umitba. Please go to the front hall to have a rest. Later, Jinyan Tantrism will hold a press conference. At that time, if you have any questions, you can ask them. Now, please leave first." The reporters looked at each other and had no choice but to retreat under the guidance of the other monks. After the reporters left, the other cultivators immediately shouted, "Master Kaisai Hikariuni, what's going on?" The mystical silver fox was sealed in Jingdu. There were Yinyang masters of the Yinyang sect and monks of the Tiantai sect guarding it. Why did it escape? The Yinyang masters of the Kamo family, who had always been enemies with the Abe family, also said coldly, "Abe is right. Isn't your family responsible for guarding the soul of the mystical silver fox? Why is there such a mistake?" Abe was right. He was a middle-aged man who looked very dignified. He said in a deep voice, "Someone must have taken advantage of the situation. 2 of our clansmen are in Tokyo. Abe Aomori and I came to Mount Koya, so the Qingming shrine is empty." The Yinyang masters of the Kamo family sneered and said, "Why didn't you make full preparations? Don't you know the terrible consequences of letting the mystical silver fox escape?" Abe said angrily, "This must be a conspiracy. They transferred us to this place, and then took advantage of the situation to secretly let go of the mystical silver fox, Himao Chang. Our family has guarded the mystical silver fox for nearly 1,000 years. The price we paid is known to the whole world. It's not your turn to talk about it." Himao Chang and the other 2 sneered and did not speak again. At this time, an eminent monk of the Pure Land sect said slowly, Amitabha, calm down, everyone. It's not a way to investigate the responsibility now. Let's figure out what happened first. It's impossible for the mystical silver fox to escape by her own strength. There are not only the Abe family guarding there, but also the people of the Yanli temple of the Tiantai sect guarding around. Even if she can escape by herself, she will be sealed back soon. But now that she has escaped, it is very likely that someone has secretly received her, or that someone is plotting to release her. The eminent monk's words made everyone nod in agreement. Gu Ziguanji turned to the monk who had reported the news and said, Did the Tiantai sect make it clear who let the mystical silver fox go? The monk shook his head quickly. No. Kaisai Hikariuni pondered for a moment, then he suddenly raised his head and said to everyone with flickering eyes, Everyone. I think we might have fallen into a trap. Everyone was shocked and asked, What trap? Kaisai Hikariuni said slowly, Li Yundong, who came to fight with us, is very likely to be a cover to attract our attention. Everyone was shocked again. They looked at each other, but soon nodded and said, Yes, it's possible. It must be like this. Catch this Chinaman and force him to tell him the whereabouts of the mystical silver fox. Goddess Chuyun of the Ise Shinto frowned slightly. She suddenly said softly, This is just an inference. There is no evidence. Although her voice was soft, it carried a lot of weight. It could be said that Masako Tachibana had lost her reputation in this battle. It could be imagined that the Tachibana family would fall into a low valley because of this. The Ise Shinto would definitely rise again, and the goddess Chuyun would play a very important role in it. Therefore, as soon as she spoke, the cultivators around all looked at her. Although some people disagreed, they did not refute because of the power of the Ise Shinto and the face of the goddess Chuyun. Kaisai Hikariuni said, There is indeed no evidence, but think about it. Why didn't the mystical silver fox escape earlier or later? Why did she escape at this time? When Li Yundong was about to leave, these reporters who had been blocked outside rushed in. One thing is a coincidence. What about 2 or 3 things? Besides, the current situation is related to the life and death of our Japanese cultivation world. If we still follow the rules to pursue evidence, it will be a terrible disaster. How to save this terrible situation is the righteousness. Kaisai Hikariuni's words were firm and his tone was heavy, which was moving. Goddess Chuyun was stunned. She was a real cold and taciturn woman. She was not good at debating with words. A great monk like Kaisai Hikariuni often had to debate with others about the Dharma. His eloquence and thinking were incredibly strong. If they were to compete in words, even 100 Chuyun would not be able to defeat this old monk. The middle-aged man next to her knew that Kaisai Hikariuni's words had seized the commanding heights of morality and righteousness, but Kaisai Hikariuni had taken advantage of this opportunity to divert everyone's attention and spearhead. He had quickly gotten rid of Jinyan Tantrism from the defeat in the battle just now, so as to avoid everyone's accountability. After all, it was a great loss of face to lose to a Chinese in front of the Emperor of Japan. But at the moment, what was more important than investigating this responsibility was to hunt down the mystical silver fox. At this time, the middle-aged man said, Master Kaisai Hikariuni is right. We should immediately chase after the mystical silver fox before she fully recovers her strength. Kaisai Hikariuni looked at the middle-aged man in surprise, as if he didn't understand why Ise Shinto would speak up for him. But seeing the olive branch handed over by the other party, Kaisai Hikariuni quickly took it. He said, Amitabha, Lord Xinguang is right. This is the time for us to unite sincerely and overcome the calamity. Xinguang smiled and said, Master Kaisai Hikariuni is right, but who will take the responsibility of hunting down the mystical silver fox? Kaisai Hikariuni was stunned. He glanced at Xinguang and saw that his smile was full of meaning. He was furious. He thought that the other party had handed him an olive branch, but who knew that it was a straw? Kaisai Hikariuni cursed in his heart, what a cunning guy. How dare he try to take away the dominance of the Japanese cultivation world at this time? Where there are people, there is jianghu, and where there is jianghu, there is fighting. Even the Japanese, who have always been united, can't jump out of this cage in the face of the struggle for fame and wealth and power. Masako Tachibana had fallen. Now, who didn't covet the throne of Mount Tianwang? Kaisai Hikaryuni knew that whoever could shoulder the responsibility of hunting down the mystical silver fox would be able to take away the leadership. Whoever could seize the leadership would be able to stand at the commanding heights of the Japanese cultivation world on the basis of righteousness, just like what the Jinyan Tantrism had done before. Kaisai Hikaryuni wanted to object, but he couldn't refute Xinguang's words no matter how hard he racked his brains, because the other party was also speaking from a righteous point of view. Moreover, it was even more impossible for him to recommend the Jinyan Tantrism to stand at the forefront of the storm. Who would believe in a sect that had just been defeated in a fight? However, Kaisai Hikaryuni was not an ordinary person. His mind was like lightning. He thought quickly and said, "The mystical silver fox is a powerful demon that has only been seen in thousands of years. If we want to catch her, one or two sects can't succeed. This matter should be done together by all of us." Xinguang also cursed in his heart, "Old bald donkey, you know that you can't object to my words, so you simply suggest that all the major sects share the leadership together. Damn it." Xinguang smiled and said, "Although what Master Kaisai Hikaryuni said is good, if we don't have a leader, we will fall into a situation where there is no leader. Maybe we will be defeated by the mystical silver fox one by one." Some sects were close to the Ise Shinto, so they agreed one after another. Naturally, the other sects were not stupid. Some people objected, some shouted, and some bowed their heads in thought. Tachibana Wakako, who walked to the backyard with Masako Tachibana in her arms, carefully wiped the blood from the corner of her mother's mouth. She raised her head and looked at the cultivators who were quarreling in the courtyard. She said with a blank face, "Are they all crazy? Why are they still quarreling at this time? Why can't they unite a little?" Tsuruko Tachibana knelt on the tatami, took the blood-stained towel from Tachibana Wakako's hand and washed it in the wooden bucket beside her. She sighed softly and said, "Wakako, when you grow up, you will understand." Tachibana Wakako shook her head and said, "If I have to understand this when I grow up, I will become like them, then I would rather not grow up." Tsuruko Tachibana smiled and stroked Tachibana Wakako's long black hair lovingly. "I hope you will remember what you said in the future. Wakako, don't waste your life on fighting for fame and fortune. Don't repeat Masako's mistake." Tachibana Wakako seemed to have grown up a lot. She looked up at her grandmother and nodded hard. "Yes." Tsuruko Tachibana smiled with relief. She raised her eyes and looked worriedly at the noisy cultivators in the field. She was silent. Tachibana Wakako also followed her gaze and said worriedly, "How long do they want to quarrel? Grandma, how do you think they will solve it? Will they keep quarreling until the mystical silver fox recovers all her strength?" Tsuruko Tachibana shook his head and said, "No, they will definitely think of a solution. And this method is simple and easy to do." Tachibana Wakako asked in confusion, "What is it?" Tsuruko Tachibana frowned and said, "First, whoever finds the mystical silver fox first will take the lead." Tachibana Wakako said curiously, "But the world is so big. Where can we find the mystical silver fox? It doesn't matter if we send fewer people. If we send a large number of people to look for it, will our own hometown be empty, and in turn, the mystical silver fox will take advantage of it?" Tsuruko Tachibana looked at Tachibana Wakako with admiration and said, "You're right. So, in fact, the best way is the second." Tachibana Wakako asked, "What's the second way?" Tsuruko Tachibana said with a serious face, "Whoever can defeat Li Jiandong will be able to take the lead." Tachibana Wakako was shocked. "Why?" As soon as she blurted out these words, she immediately reacted. It could be said that all of this had an inseparable relationship with Li Jiandong. In the eyes of almost all the cultivators present, Li Jiandong must be one of the participants in releasing the mystical silver fox. They had the reason and righteousness to crusade against Li Jiandong. In addition, Li Jiandong had defeated Masako Tachibana in front of His Majesty the Mikado, which had humiliated the Japanese cultivation world. If anyone could defeat Li Jiandong again, the prestige and reputation it would bring would naturally be self-evident. Tachibana Wakako was not a fool. She quickly figured it out, but she couldn't believe it. They won't leave the mystical silver fox alone and go to find trouble with Li Jiandong first, will they? As soon as Tachibana Wakako finished speaking, she heard a cultivator in the field say loudly, "In my opinion, all of this is because of that Chinese man. If it weren't for him, the mystical silver fox wouldn't have been able to escape. If it weren't for him, we wouldn't have lost so much face in front of His Majesty the Mikado. In my opinion, whoever can defeat this Chinese man, we will recommend him to be the leader of the crusade against the mystical silver fox." This sentence stunned Tachibana Wakako. She couldn't believe that someone would really ignore the danger of the mystical silver fox and go to find trouble with Li Jiandong first. Are these guys idiots? Can't they tell the priorities? However, when the cultivators of the other sects heard this, they were silent for a while and nodded at the same time. Ise Shinto's divine light was full of sarcastic smile. He said, "This is really a good idea. Go to find trouble with the reincarnated Wisdom King? Who will go?" Everyone looked at each other. Yes, this Chinese man is the immovable Wisdom King. Such an abnormal power of Masako Tachibana has been absorbed by this guy. Isn't it courting death to go to find trouble with him? At this time, Kaisai Hikariuni said, "Don't worry. The power of Wisdom King used by Masako Tachibana can't be completely used by Li Jiandong. This power belongs to our Mount Koya. He can use it, but he can't take it away." Everyone was immediately relieved. Many cultivators began to clamor, "Go and kill this Chinese man who humiliated us. He must be one of the conspirators who released the mystical silver fox. He must also know where the mystical silver fox is hiding. Go and catch him and force him to tell us the whereabouts of the mystical silver fox. Yes, yes. We must take revenge. But if we go to the door, will it cause the rebound of the cultivation world in China? Humph, if the Chinese man covers up for this guy, then we will declare war. This Chinese man humiliated us in front of His Majesty the Mikado, and then took advantage of the weakness to let the mystical silver fox go. This is already the biggest provocation to us. Yes. If any sect protects him, then we will go to war with them." Most of the cultivation sects responded loudly and angrily. The emotions on the scene were as fierce as a raging fire, burning fiercely. Ise Shinto's divine light and Chuyun looked at the crowd in shock. They all wanted to say something, but at this time, all the sects and schools in the Japanese cultivation world were excited, and the general trend had been formed. If they didn't go with the trend, even Ise Shinto would be abandoned. Not only would they not get any benefits, but they would also be regarded as traitors and aliens by the Japanese cultivation world. Tachibana Wakako, who was looking at the crowd from afar in the backyard, said in shock, "Are they all crazy? This will cause a war between the cultivation world of China and Japan." Tsuruko Tachibana shook his head and sighed, "Child. The war has already begun. You and I can't stop it." Chapter 644. Just as the Japanese cultivation world was in a state of excitement, a dazzling ray of light suddenly appeared in a remote uninhabited mountain area on the mainland of China. After the ray of light flashed, two figures appeared in the dense jungle. One of them was tall and sturdy. It was Lu Yi, and the other was shining with golden light. His body was twisted, and after a while, there was a loud bang, turning into countless rays of golden light and scattering in all directions. Lu Yi was shocked and angry. He shouted, "Don't want the mystical silver fox. I'm a disciple of the Fox Zen school. Don't go. I let you go. Don't run." However, the mystical silver fox didn't seem to hear him. Her young spirit doppelganger instantly escaped. Even if Lu Yi wanted to follow her footsteps, he didn't know how to catch up. Lu Yi stood there in a daze. After a long time, a person slowly walked out from behind him. This person had a graceful figure and a vermilion beauty mole between her eyebrows. It was Ao Wushuang. Ao Wushuang was also surprised and said, "Did you release the mystical silver fox? Why did she run away?" "Bastard." Lu Yi punched a big tree beside him unwillingly. His fist was like a hot knife cutting cheese. In an instant, it penetrated the big tree that could only be hugged by two people. Lu Yi gritted his teeth and said, "The mystical silver fox has been sealed for too long." When she was released, the reorganization of her soul was interrupted by the people of the Tiantai sect. Therefore, she has no memory now, nor has she recovered all her strength. In addition, because her soul is incomplete, she doesn't even have the most basic thinking and judgment. At this time, the intelligence and reaction of the mystical silver fox are no different from those of the most primitive beasts. She can't distinguish between enemies and friends. She can only judge the most beneficial choice for herself based on the most primitive beast nature. Ao Wushuang was tongue-tied and asked, "How could this happen? What's the best choice for her now?" Lu Yi looked at Ao Wushuang with a cold face. "If it were you, how would you react after losing something?" Ao Wushuang said quickly, "Go and get it back." Lu Yi nodded slightly. "That's right." Ao Wushuang was also a very smart woman. She soon realized what Lu Yi was angry about. "You don't know where the rest of the soul of the mystical silver fox is?" Lu Yi sneered and said, "Of course I know. Do you think my decades of planning is in vain?" Ao Wushuang asked in confusion, "Then why are you so angry? Since you know, why don't you just go and wait for them?" Lu Yi said angrily, "Do you know which soul the mystical silver fox is looking for? Moreover, if I know, how can others not know? If I go to wait for the rabbit, then the bald donkeys of Shiyuan Temple and Jinshan Temple will know. Most importantly, how can the mystical silver fox appear so easily? Her paranoia is rare in the world. I suspect that even if she finds the remnant of her soul, she won't retrieve it immediately. Because when she retrieves her soul, she will definitely lose the ability to defend herself for a period of time. So, she will definitely wait for the best opportunity to strike." Ao Wushuang became more and more confused. "But isn't this better? That will save you the trouble." Lu Yi was usually a scheming and shrewd old fox. He had always been famous for his calculations and strategies. Even if he encountered something big, he would be calm. However, he seemed extremely anxious and his state was extremely abnormal. He said, "What's good about it? Do you know how much time we have left? The mystical silver fox has been sealed for 1,000 years. Although she is eager for revenge, her patience and suspicion are enough for her to hide for a long time. Moreover, the news of the resurrection of the mystical silver fox will definitely spread throughout the cultivation world in China. At that time, the cultivators of all sects will go crazy to look for the mystical silver fox. Do you think that with the character of the mystical silver fox, she will show up?" Ao Wushuang fell silent and didn't say a word. Indeed, as Lu Yi had said, if she was the mystical silver fox, she would definitely keep waiting and hide for a few months or even a few years. For the mystical silver fox, her time measurement unit must be calculated in 100 years or even 1,000 years. She had been sealed for nearly 1,000 years. Would she care about waiting a little longer? Lu Yi walked back and forth anxiously. He put his hands behind his back, his face as dark as water, and his eyes flashed with a cold light, as if he was quickly thinking about countermeasures. Ao Wushuang was silent for a long time before she said slowly, "In fact, I have never understood why you have to resurrect the mystical silver fox. Isn't it good for us to be like this now? Do you have to revive the Fox Zen school? Don't you know that this may lead to the destruction of our Fox Zen school?" Lu Yi suddenly stopped. He turned his head and said with a gloomy look in his eyes, "You are really naive. Others see us as demons and ghosts and want to get rid of us as soon as possible. You don't see yourself as an outsider." Ao Wushuang also argued, "But didn't you see that the Fox Zen school is thriving in Li Jiandong's hands? He now has a place in the cultivation world. If you hadn't framed him, how could so many hostile sects have come to attack the Fox Zen school?" Lu Yi laughed angrily. "Before he appeared, did you forget that the 6 great sects besieged the Fox Zen school?" Ao Wushuang's face darkened and she said, "This is caused by the grudge between me and Yan Fang." Lu Yi sneered and said, "An ordinary man is innocent, but he gets into trouble because of his wealth. You shouldn't be such a naive and childish person." "Wushuang, I think you've been with Li Jiandong for too long, and your heart has softened." Ao Wushuang said with a cold face, "I'm worried that Chon'er will be involved." Lu Yi said, "When the nest is overturned, how can there be an intact egg? Let me tell you, if the mystical silver fox doesn't show up for a long time, then your precious disciple and Li Jiandong will definitely face the blame and censure of the whole cultivation world. At that time, Ao Wushuang's face became extremely ugly. "Why is this happening? Didn't we agree not to involve Chon'er in this?" Lu Yi smiled coldly. "Do you think I want to? What can I do when things have changed like this?" Ao Wushuang couldn't help but be furious. "You bastard! You don't keep your word. I'm going to find the leader." After that, she turned into a blue light and left quickly. Lu Yi looked at Ao Wushuang's departing figure and said loudly, "You'd better go to find the mystical silver fox first." After he shouted, Ao Wushuang had already disappeared. Lu Yi sneered for a while. After a long time, he turned around and went into the dense forest. At this time, Li Jiandong was flying to Tiannan City with Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin. Li Jiandong flew in the air and looked at Zi Yuan in confusion. "Why are you here?" Su Chan was afraid that Li Jiandong would blame Zi Yuan, so she rushed to say, "Sister Zi Yuan was afraid that you would be detained by the Japanese, so she discussed a way with us to secretly pick you up." Li Jiandong thought for a moment and suddenly realized something. "Did you let those reporters in?" Zi Yuan nodded with a smile and said, "Yes, but Zhou Qin asked someone to make the call." Although he saw that the 3 of them had not listened to him and acted on their own, Li Jiandong still felt a little grateful in his heart. He glanced at Zhou Qin, only to see his beautiful disciple rushing to say, "It was Zi Yuan's careful plan. I was just an errand runner." Su Chan also nodded quickly. Yes, Sister Zi Yuan's idea is so good. If it weren't for this, Yundong, you would have been in danger." Li Jiandong smiled helplessly. "You 3. No one will listen to what I say in the future." Zi Yuan smiled apologetically and said, "I'm really sorry. I didn't listen to you and made things difficult for you." In the face of such a beautiful woman's soft apology, Li Jiandong couldn't vent his anger even if he was full of anger. He shook his head and said, "Forget it. I was too conceited. I thought that these Japanese should still care about their face and wouldn't do such a shameless thing. But I didn't expect. I thought too highly of them." Zi Yuan said softly, "Li Jiandong, don't blame yourself. No sect or country would allow you to leave alive in such a situation. For cultivation sects, reputation and face are too important. Otherwise, if such a scandal were to spread, who would still join your sect? Who would still believe in your gods?" In this way, the cornerstone of cultivation and faith will be shaken, and this will become a matter of life and death. Li Jiandong sighed softly. "In this matter, I was too naive. Thank you for your help. Otherwise, even if I could escape, would have to pay a heavy price." Su Chan suddenly interrupted, "Actually, Yundong, you don't have to think too much. I think even if the 3 of us didn't do anything, the chances of you escaping were still very high." Li Jiandong smiled and pinched the tip of the little girl's nose. "You don't have to comfort me. I'm already reflecting on myself. In the past, I was always afraid that something would happen to you, so I didn't take you with me. Now it seems that you are growing very fast. It seems that you can already take charge of things on your own. In the future, I'll take you with me wherever I go, okay? Su Chan was overjoyed and said happily, okay, take me with you wherever you go. Li Jiandong smiled and said, I'll take you with me when I take a bath, okay? Su Chan's ears turned red and she said angrily, you're so annoying. You're playing with me. Zhou Qin and Zi Yuan smiled. Zhou Qin asked, by the way, Su Chan, you seemed very surprised and flustered before. You said that if you were late, you wouldn't be able to save Master. What's going on? The smile on Su Chan's face suddenly disappeared. She looked at Li Jiandong, wanting to say something but hesitating. Li Jiandong asked curiously, is there anything you can't say? Su Chan hesitated for a moment and said, just now, I seem to feel a very strong fox demon qi appearing in a very far place. Li Jiandong's flying figure suddenly stopped. He was stunned and said, a very strong fox demon qi. Where is it? Su Chan pointed in the direction of the capital. It's over there, but it's very far away now. Li Jiandong asked, are you familiar with this aura? Could it be your master? Su Chan shook her head and said, no, master's aura is not that strong. Zi Yuan suddenly asked, Su Chan, how much stronger is this aura compared to your master's? Su Chan thought for a moment and said hesitantly, master is a seven-tailed fox spirit. I feel that this aura is at least several times stronger than master's. It feels like a nine-tailed fox. What? Li Jiandong and the others immediately stopped in midair. At the same time, they exclaimed in shock, nine-tailed fox? Su Chan looked at Li Jiandong timidly and said weakly, I'm not sure, but, at that time, I felt that it should be the aura of a nine-tailed fox. Otherwise, it wouldn't be so strong. Li Jiandong suddenly remembered what he had thought of in the secret room of the Fox Zen school. His heart skipped a beat and he murmured, could it be the mystical silver fox? There was a flash of fear in Su Chan's eyes. She said, I don't think so. Why would the mystical silver fox be in Japan? Li Jiandong stared at Su Chan with bright eyes and said slowly, Chaner, in fact, you also believe that this is the mystical silver fox, right? Su Chan opened her mouth and swallowed her negative words. Finally, she nodded helplessly. The little girl looked at Li Jiandong timidly and said, Yundong, if it's really the resurrection of the mystical silver fox, then what should we do? Li Jiandong's face was surprisingly serious. He looked at Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin, only to see that his two left and right arms were also shocked. Li Jiandong said in a deep voice, if it's really the mystical silver fox, then it was too dangerous just now. Once these Japanese cultivators know that the mystical silver fox has escaped in Japan, they will definitely blame it on me. At that time, I really can't explain it, and I will definitely die. Zi Yuan took a deep breath and recovered from the shock. She calmed down and said, now we should immediately find the whereabouts of the mystical silver fox. Zhou Qin asked in a deep voice, but where is the mystical silver fox? Zi Yuan and Su Chan said in unison, I know where she is. Li Jiandong and Zhou Qin were stunned at the same time. They looked at the two of them and wondered in their hearts, why do both of them know the whereabouts of the mystical silver fox? Don't worry, the mystical silver fox is not the end of the story. The story is still long. Everyone, take your time. In addition, I strongly recommend another fox book, Tyrant is Too Evil, Prefers Little Fox Princess, written by Meng Pe, a great writer. The link is here. Chapter 645. Li Yundong looked at Zi Yuan and Su Chan in confusion and asked, how do you two know where the mystical silver fox is? Zi Yuan and Su Chan looked at each other. Su Chan said, Sister Zi Yuan, you tell me. But unexpectedly, Ziyuan also said at the same time, Su Chan, you tell me. As soon as the two of them finished speaking, they looked at each other and smiled. Li Yundong said helplessly, don't be modest at this time. Su Chan, you go first. Su Chan nodded and said, Yundong, do you still remember Miss Chow? Li Yundong was stunned for a moment. Miss Chow? Chow Kefi? Su Chan said, yes, the first time I saw Miss Chow, I felt that she had a very familiar aura. Not only me, but other people in the Fox Zen school also felt that her aura was very familiar when they saw her, just like seeing a fellow disciple of the Fox Zen school. Yundong, don't you think it's strange? At this time, Ziyuan said, and when I first saw her, she only had one soul and two spirits. Logically speaking, a person should have 3 souls and 7 spirits, but her soul is incomplete. Li Yundong was shocked and said subconsciously, is it really her? Zhou Qin was tongue-tied, as if she couldn't believe what Su Chan and Ziyuan had said. Chow Kefi was a famous businesswoman in Tiannan City. She also had a personal relationship with Zhou Qin. But how could she imagine that such a beautiful businesswoman turned out to be the reincarnation of the mystical silver fox? Zhou Qin said, Master, do you know that Miss Chow is the mystical silver fox? Li Yundong's face was very ugly. He frowned and said, when Yen Fong tried to kill Chow Kefi last time, I had already thought about this problem. Why would Yen Fong rather kill Chow Kefi without the Liuha sword? Moreover, if she wanted to kill Chow Kefi, she had 10,000 ways. Why did she choose to expel her soul? At that time, I had already guessed a little, but I couldn't believe it. As he said this, Li Yundong took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, now it seems that Chow Kefi should be the soul of the mystical silver fox's avatar. Su Chan looked at Li Yundong worriedly and said, Yundong, what should we do now? For some reason, Li Yundong suddenly felt agitated, and his thoughts were in a mess. I don't know what to do. If Chow Kefi was really the mystical silver fox, what should he do? Kill the mystical silver fox? Or watching the mystical silver fox and Chow Kefi's soul merge into one? If that was the case, wouldn't Chow Kefi be dead? Li Yundong knew that Chow Kefi had a good impression of him, so he had been avoiding her. But deep in Li Yundong's heart, he remembered Chow Kefi's kindness in helping him. As the saying goes, the grace of a drop of water should be repaid with a gushing spring. I haven't repaid Chow Kefi yet. Am I going to watch her die? How could this be? However, if Chow Kefi was really the remnant soul of the mystical silver fox, then she would definitely become the target of public criticism in the cultivation world. Everyone wanted to get rid of her as soon as possible. Even if the mystical silver fox did not come to retrieve her soul, other cultivation sects would not let her live. It could be said that Chow Kefi was already a person who was almost bound to die. But if he wanted to save Chow Kefi, he would be the enemy of the entire cultivation world. It could even be said that he would be the enemy of the mystical silver fox and the cultivation sects in the world at the same time. Even if he got all the spiritual power of the immovable wisdom king, it was impossible for him to challenge all the cultivators in the world and the mystical silver fox at the same time. But, did he have to watch Chow Kefi die? Li Yundong's face turned blue. He clenched his fists and couldn't say anything for a long time. Ziyuan knew Li Yundong's worries very well. She thought for a moment and advised him softly, Li Yundong, don't worry. In my opinion, you have a good relationship with Chow Kefi anyway. You can contact her privately as a friend first, and then act according to the circumstances. What do you think? Li Yundong sighed and said, what you said makes sense, but this is only a temporary measure, not a long-term plan. If Chow Kefi's identity was really exposed and others knew about it, then she would really be dead. Even I can't protect her. Zhou Qin said, since the mystical silver fox escaped from Japan, in my opinion, she is probably the former Tamamo no Mai. If it is really Tamamo no Mai, then it will be too troublesome. The Japanese cultivation world will definitely come to China to find the whereabouts of the mystical silver fox. If that's the case, then the pressure will be even greater. Li Yundong's face became even gloomier. He frowned and said after a long time, let's do as you say first. I'll go to find Chao Kefi, President Chao. Su Chan quickly said, what about us? Li Yundong looked at Su Chan and forced a smile. He took out the Medicine King tripod from his arms and said, the three of you can be regarded as three Jinshin masters together. No one will dare to provoke you. So you are responsible for returning this Medicine King tripod to Shenwan Kai. Su Chan was disappointed when she saw that Li Yundong was unwilling to take her with him. She said with an aggrieved face, ah? You want me to return the Medicine King tripod? Sister Zi Yuan and Sister Zhou Qin can go. Didn't you just say that you would take me with you wherever you go? Why didn't you fulfill your promise so soon? Li Yundong sighed softly and gently patted Su Chan's head. Silly girl, if you follow me, it will be too eye-catching. At that time, it will attract other people's attention. If it's just me, it'll be a little better. The chance of being discovered will be much smaller. Su Chan blinked her eyes and gently pulled Li Yundong's sleeve. She said considerately, I know. You're right. I'm willful. Then I'll go to Mr. Shen's place with Sister Zi Yuan and Sister Zhou Qin. Last time, the Medicine King tripod was stolen in front of me. It was so embarrassing. This time, I can't let anyone steal this Medicine King tripod. Zi Yuan also smiled and said, Li Yundong, don't worry. This time, we will never let the Medicine King tripod be stolen again. Zhou Qin said with concern, Master, you must be careful alone. If you really meet the mystical silver fox, don't try to be brave. Even if the mystical silver fox takes over President Chao's body, maybe we still have a chance to save President Chao. Li Yundong smiled gratefully at the three of them and said, I see. You three should also be careful. After the four of them finished their discussion, they flew back to Tiannan City. After flying over Tiannan City, Li Yundong said goodbye to Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin, and then flew to the building where Chao Kefi was. After Li Yundong found a relatively remote place to land, he took out his mobile phone and dialed Chao Kefi's number. However, after making a few calls, Chao Kefi didn't answer the phone. An ominous thought flashed through Li Yundong's mind. He quickly ran toward the Dongxing building. After entering the Dongxing building, Li Yundong went straight to the 9th floor. When he got to the 9th floor, he rushed inside. The receptionist quickly stopped him and asked, Sir, do you have an appointment? Li Yundong didn't stop and said quickly, I'm looking for Chao Kefi. Is she here? Seeing that she couldn't stop him, the receptionist quickly stamped her feet and said, Hey, you can't go in. Security, come on. As she spoke, a few security guards ran out of the office in the inner room, holding sticks in their hands. They stared at Li Yundong covetously, eager to have a try. Because of the previous incident of Wang Yong collecting debts in Chao Kefi's company, Chao Kefi fired all the security guards of the company and replaced them with a new batch. This time, the new batch of security guards were no longer those who had used their connections to get in, but soldiers who had been carefully selected by Chao Kefi and had retired from the army. These security guards were all as burly as bulls and tigers. Each of them was almost half a head taller than Li Yundong, and the tallest one was even 1.9 meters. Because there was a warm central air conditioner in the building, these security guards were all wearing camouflage short-sleeved shirts and tactical vests. There was a walkie-talkie and an electric baton hanging on the strap of the vest. They were fully equipped. They had an armed belt around their waists and a pair of cowhide hiking boots on their feet. These boots were hard and thick. When their legs were chopped down, it was no different from an axe chopping a person's body. These security guards were originally soldiers who had retired from the army. They were so masculine that they had nowhere to vent it. After coming to this media company where there were so many beautiful women, their hearts were itching. They had long wanted to try their skills and perform well in front of so many beautiful women. But how could there be so much trouble in the world? After Li Yundong had dealt with Wang Yong last time, who in Tiannan City didn't know that Chao Kefi knew a master named Li Yundong? And on the day of the high-profile opening of the Desanxian, Li Yundong had taken Zhou Qin with him. Who didn't know that he and Zhou Qin had a very good relationship? As for who Zhou Qin was? What a joke! Everyone in Tiannan City knew who Zhou Qin was. When people were out there, they could not know who their parents were, but they absolutely had to know who those high-ranking officials and their children were. Otherwise, if they got used to being arrogant one day and couldn't stop themselves, they wouldn't even know how they died. It was also because of this relationship that which ignorant gangster in Tiannan City dared to cause trouble for Chao Kefi. These days had been calm, and the security guards had long been idle. At this time, seeing the movement at the door, they immediately rushed out excitedly, wishing they could immediately show off their power. But they were not fools. For the sake of their own jobs, they did not stupidly make a move immediately. The leading security guard pointed at Li Yundong's nose with his baton and shouted, "Hey, stop!" Li Yundong frowned slightly and glanced at the baton in front of his nose. He didn't want to cause a conflict with these secular people, so he took a step back. When the security guard saw Li Yundong retreat, he immediately turned his head proudly and said to the receptionist, "What happened?" When the receptionist saw them coming, she was a little relieved and quickly said, as soon as he came in, he said he wanted to find President Chao. He rushed in with all his might. I couldn't stop him. The security guard looked Li Yundong up and down. Before he could say anything, he suddenly saw a white-collar woman passing by turn her head. After carefully looking at Li Yundong, she said in surprise, "You are Li Yundong?" Li Yundong was stunned. He glanced at the woman and saw that she was dressed in professional women's clothes. She had long wavy hair and was dressed in a fashionable and sexy way. She looked vaguely familiar. He thought for a moment and suddenly said, "I remember. You are Xia Yu." The woman in front of him was none other than Xia Yu, the beautiful white-collar woman who had secretly given him a note after Li Yundong had saved Chao Kefi and wanted to ask him out. After Li Yundong had declined at that time, the two of them had brushed past each other. They had thought that they would never meet again, but they had not expected to meet again today. When Xia Yu saw that Li Yundong still remembered her, she was overjoyed. She reached out her hand and said with a smile, "I didn't expect you to still remember me. I thought that a noble person would have a short memory." After that, she pursed her lips and smiled. Li Yundong laughed and said, "Aren't you an employee of President Yin on the 19th floor? Why are you here? Where is President Chao?" You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.